This is part 2 of the Trappist Incident, the first book in R.M. Stratton's Concord Horizon series. The full ebook is available on Amazon at the link in the description. 14. The Hunt Turns. The Fang cut through space like something that had never learned to do anything else. Kalar design philosophy had no patience for elegance. Angular hull, reinforced plating at every structural junction. Weapons systems built into the frame rather than mounted onto it as secondary considerations. The ship did not glide through space the way human vessels did, with their rounder lines and their implicit suggestion of something trying to move harmoniously through an environment. The Fang advanced through it. The void was the next obstacle to be pushed through, the same way every obstacle was the next obstacle to be pushed through. And the ship's geometry communicated that it had been built by people who thought about space that way. The atmosphere inside matched the exterior completely. Cold, minimal, controlled. Every system allocated exactly the space it required and nothing additional. Corridors wide enough to function, not wide enough to suggest comfort. Quarters adequate for the purpose of rest, not designed to encourage the kind of relaxation that produced soft thinking. A ship that wasted nothing, not space, not energy, not words, because the culture that built it had decided long ago that waste was a form of weakness, and weakness was something that happened to other species. Three Heel's quarters occupied a section marginally larger than the standard crew allocation, not as a concession to comfort, but because his work required it. Secure communication systems, a tactical display capable of rendering multi-system operational pictures simultaneously, storage for the kind of physical documentation that did not exist in any networked system, for reasons that had proven correct more than once, a room built for thinking rather than living. He sat with a tablet in his hand, reviewing data he had already reviewed, not because the information required additional processing. He had processed it completely the first time. He read it again because thinking sometimes required an anchor, something for the eyes to rest on while the mind worked through layers that had nothing to do with what was on the screen. The confirmation had arrived earlier that day. Official letterhead, unmistakable authentication, entirely unsurprising to anyone who understood how the Concord Warden Council operated when it made a collective decision about one of its own. His status as a Concord Warden had been stripped, privileges revoked, access to warden systems and assets terminated. The lifetime of accumulated authority he had built through decades of work dissolved in a single vote taken in his absence. Three Heel had read it once, absorbed every word with the focused attention he brought to everything, and set it aside. He had factored the loss into his planning the moment he committed to the operation at Trappist-1. Warden status had been useful right up to the point where his objective required something the Concord would never sanction. After that, the status was a liability. Its removal was a closed cost, not a surprise, and he had no use for the kind of energy other people spent regretting closed costs. "They will send someone," he said to the empty quarters. Not conjecture. The Concord did not leave situations like this unaddressed. He had been one of them long enough to understand the institutional logic. Problems were resolved, not left to develop on their own. He was now the problem. Someone was already being dispatched. Someone competent enough to assess what he was doing and act on the assessment, which narrowed the candidate list to a number he could anticipate. He set the tablet down and looked at the tactical display. The Ice Moon base, the Miri Mail, the Trappist-1 database, secured aboard this ship and still locked against every decryption methodology his people had attempted. 3 variables, and only one of them was currently giving him results. The door opened. Three Heel did not turn. He had heard the approach in the corridor. the rhythm of footfall that belonged to his assassin, a human who had learned somewhere in his operational history that making noise was a choice rather than an inevitability, and had chosen accordingly. The quiet was professional, not natural, which made it more reliable. Professional choices persisted under pressure. Natural ones sometimes did not. "Speak." The assassin stopped a few steps inside the room. "It's done." Thriel kept his grip on the tablet unchanged. Tarek Vol. Eliminated. Single shot through the structural wall of the private room at Sagittarius I. Immediate termination. No witnesses with direct line of sight to my position. The report was delivered with the brevity of someone who had given these reports before and understood what information was required. Clean, efficient, within parameters. The others in the room? A pause, fractionally longer than the preceding ones, which meant the next information carried a different quality. Hansen was present with 2 associates. They responded to the shot, assessed the entry point, and moved immediately to the docking ring. They departed the station. Trujillo turned fully for the first time. With what? Tarek Vol's shuttle. The silence that settled after those 4 words was heavier than anything preceding it. Trujillo held it without trying to fill it, letting the implication complete itself before he responded. His eyes narrowed by a degree, which means they may have accessed his data systems. The extent is unknown. I was positioned to observe the departure only. I could not determine what was transferred before they launched. That answer was not what he wanted. It was, however, honest, which Trujillo recognized as the more valuable quality. He could work with uncertainty. He could not work with false certainty. He stood with the deliberate control of someone managing something that wanted to be less controlled than he was permitting. Tarek Vol had been compromised. He had made a decision to speak. The contact with Hansen was not coincidental. Someone directed him there, and Vol had agreed to the meeting knowing what it meant. A pause. "You made the correct decision." The assassin inclined his head. Acknowledgement without submission. The posture of a professional receiving confirmation that the judgment call had been evaluated and found sound. The distinction mattered to Trujillo. He did not want people around him who needed approval. He wanted people who made good decisions independently and could receive confirmation without turning it into something more than it was. He moved to the far wall and stood with his back to the room, looking at nothing. He should not have forced that necessity. The words carried a quiet edge that was not quite anger. The frustration of someone made to spend a resource he would have preferred to preserve. Tarek Vol had been useful for years. The network of contacts he maintained, the intelligence he could access through whisper network channels, the trust Lenian brokers commanded in certain corridors of the criminal underworld. All of it gone now, spent in a single moment Vol had apparently decided was worth the cost. Trujillo did not share that assessment, but Vol had made his decision, and the consequences of it had been as predictable as every other consequence that flowed from choosing the wrong side of an arrangement. He stopped. Something was aligning in his thinking, a pattern connecting pieces he had been holding separately. The whisper network, Hansen's arrival at Anchor Station within a tight operational window, Vol's willingness to meet with a coalition naval captain, the drone that had been sent to intercept Singapore before they had even docked, containing targeted information that had directed them precisely where they needed to go. The whisper network, he said. The assassin remained still. Information was being processed, not a question being asked. They have burned me. Pure assessment, the way you assessed weather or a tactical terrain feature. They gave Hansen the path, Anchor Station. Vol, the shuttle. He worked through the sequence, each element confirming the next in a chain too specific to be coincidental. They did not simply withdraw from our arrangement. They redirected coalition resources toward me. They turned their own intelligence against their own former client. He understood why. He had violated an agreement. In the network's operational philosophy, violated agreements had to produce visible consequences, or the agreements became meaningless. He was the consequence, and Hansen was the instrument they had chosen to deliver it. Clean, efficient, required no direct action that could be attributed to them. He would have made the same choice in their position. That did not make it acceptable. His grip on the tablet tightened. The casing flexed slightly under the pressure of his fingers, not enough to fracture, enough to register what would happen if he allowed it. He held the moment for one breath, then set the tablet down carefully on the edge of the tactical display. The control was deliberate. The deliberateness was the message. The assassin had not moved. That, too, was the correct response. Thriel stood motionless for a moment, working through what the current situation actually was, rather than what it had been 20 minutes ago. Hansen had Vol's shuttle, which meant he potentially had whatever Vol had been carrying on his ship's data systems, which meant Hansen now had a thread leading toward the Ice Moon base, which meant the window for completing the operation there had narrowed considerably. It also meant something else. Hansen was moving precisely the way Thriel had expected him to move, perhaps slightly faster, but not in a direction Thriel had failed to anticipate. The Whisper network had aimed him. Hansen had taken the aim and run with it. That was not improvisation. That was what a competent operator did with good intelligence. The variable was speed, not direction. Speed was something Thriel could absorb. He turned to the room's primary systems. All units. The ship's internal alert system activated immediately. Crew transitioning to operational status throughout the vessel without requiring additional instruction. New course. He entered the coordinates himself. The Ice Moon. The decommissioned Helionix extraction facility in the outer band of the gas giant's orbital system, the place he had chosen precisely because its electromagnetic environment made communication signals difficult to detect, and because nobody had any reason to know it, existed, unless they had been told. The kind of isolation that should have been impossible to locate through any conventional intelligence process. Should have been. Maximum speed. The implication needed no elaboration. The careful, methodical approach that had characterized the operation up to this point was finished. Hansen would arrive on a clock measured in days, not weeks. The window for handling the Miri mail in the manner originally planned was closing. Thriel had already been thinking about what to do with that closing window for several minutes before the assassin had walked into the room. The presence of the news did not generate the plan. It clarified the timeline. He had read the file on Peter Hansen thoroughly. Academy record. Field assessments. The fast-track command his superiors at the Coalition had decided was worth the risk of an officer who did not always follow the expected path. The file described someone who made unconventional decisions with enough consistency to suggest they were deliberate rather than accidental. Someone who improvised not out of desperation but out of a genuine belief that the unexpected angle was sometimes the correct one. Thriel understood that instinct. He had spent his warden career acting on it himself, which was precisely why Hansen would not get there first. The assassin spoke once more. "Orders for me, sir." Thriel did not turn from the display. "Remain aboard? The Coalition has just placed a uniformed officer between us and the artifact's only viable interpreter. There may be additional necessary work in the days ahead, and I will need it done by someone whose judgment has already been calibrated to the operational environment." The assassin inclined his head and withdrew. Thriel watched the door seal behind him. Then he returned his attention to the tactical display, where two trajectories were beginning to converge, one belonging to a Coalition prototype operating well outside its original mission parameters, and one belonging to a Kellar warship whose captain had been calculating Hansen's arrival since before Hansen had decided to come. "They will come," he said. "Not a worry, an observation. A line on a diagram he had been drawing for longer than the diagram's other inhabitants had known it existed." Outside the hull, the Fang's vector shifted with the clean precision of a ship whose drive systems had been maintained to standards exceeding coalition specifications. The engines built toward the FTL threshold. Stars elongated as the geometry of normal space began bending around the transition point. 2 ships, 2 trajectories, 1 ice moon. Hansen would arrive expecting to act. 3 Hill intended to be the room he walked into. 15 preparations. One thing I learned early: you do not prepare for a mission sitting in a chair. You walk the ship. You look people in the eye. You make sure everyone is working from the same picture, and if they are not, you fix it before the gap becomes a problem in the field. "Hernandez, you've got the bridge," I said, stepping out of the lift. She did not turn around. "I always do." "Fair." I let myself smirk for half a second and headed aft. First stop, Med Bay. I heard the conversation before the door finished opening. "Metabolic pathways are fundamentally incompatible," Himura was saying. Gibby stood across from her with his arms folded, nodding the way he did when he was absorbing information he intended to convert into a practical problem to solve immediately. "Right, so we don't poison him. That would be the preferred outcome," Himura replied. I leaned against the doorframe. "Big fan of that approach personally." They both looked over. Himura said, "Captain." Gibby said, "Pete," in the automatic tone of someone who had decided a long time ago that titles were optional between people who had eaten together regularly. I ignored it. "Status?" Himura gestured toward her display. "None of our current food stores are compatible with Muri physiology. They cannot process human proteins, Lenian food sources, or children nutritional compounds. The metabolic architecture is too different." Gibby summarized it with his usual efficiency. "Kids on a completely different menu." I rubbed the back of my neck. "So we need to source appropriate supplies before we get anywhere near him." "Correct," Himura said. "We will need to identify and acquire compatible nutrition before extraction. We'll swing by the corner store." Gibby laughed. Himura looked at me with the expression she reserved for statements that were unhelpful but not worth arguing against. "There is a second issue." Of course there was. Muri anatomy is insectoid. Standard crew accommodations, beds, chairs, rest surfaces, are structurally incompatible with their physiology. We would need custom frameworks. I tried to picture a Muri trying to use a standard-issue ship bunk and abandon the image quickly. What kind of structures? Supportive frameworks suited to their body geometry. Nothing we currently have aboard. Gibby leaned forward slightly. "Funny you mention that. Kimov and his 3 Marines stopped by the galley earlier. They want to build something for him." I looked at him. "Kimov? Kimov." Gibby tilted his head. "Cargo-restrained hardware, structural foam from medical, fabric for the cradle." Said the doctor would specify the angles. I asked if they were sure. They were sure. Himura's expression shifted, small but real. I had not asked them. They didn't need to be asked. They overheard a conversation in the corridor and made a decision. I let that sit for a second. There were a lot of things I expected from a Marine detachment over the course of a long deployment. Voluntary furniture construction for a kidnapped alien with a complicated body plan was not among them. It was, however, exactly the kind of small, deliberate gesture that told you what kind of unit you were running. "That tracks," I said. "Doctor, give them your specifications when you have them. They will get it right." Himura nodded. "I will." I pushed off the doorframe. Keep working through the food question. We will figure out supplies when we have more to work with. Next stop, cargo bay. The doors opened onto what looked like controlled chaos, but on closer inspection it was just Kemov. He stood at the center of the space with 3 Marines in front of him, weapons laid out, gear staged with precision, a projected layout of the target installation hovering to his left. Same 4 men who had volunteered, in the middle of all of this, to build a bed for someone they had not yet met. None of them had said anything to me about it. I was fairly sure none of them intended to. Entry here, Kemov was saying, 1 finger on the display. Minimal exposure. Maximum control of the interior corridor. I stepped inside. Am I interrupting? You are observing, he said, without looking away from the layout. I moved closer. He tapped the display again. We assume resistance throughout. We assume a hostile environment. We assume no external support once we are inside. Primary objective? One of the Marines asked. Recover the target. Secondary? Survive. He said it without any particular inflection, as though it were simply the logical follow-on to the first objective. I liked that answer. Anything you need from me? Kemov looked at me steadily. We are ready. 3 words, no qualifiers. From him, that was a comprehensive status report. I gave a single nod and moved on. Last stop, shuttle bay. The doors opened, and there it was. Tarek's ship, still occupying space with all the visual appeal of something that had survived through stubbornness rather than design. Up close, it looked even worse. Mismatched hull panels, components from at least 3 different eras of manufacturing. The general impression of a vessel that had been assembled rather than built. Varro stood beneath it, arms crossed, with 2 engineers working the open panels beside him. He had the expression of someone who had accepted a professional challenge they had not asked for. Good news? He did not look at me immediately. This vessel is composed of mismatched components, several of which are obsolete by significant margins. We noticed. He turned. I believe I can bring it within operational parameters. That's a very measured way to phrase it. It is the most accurate phrasing. One of the engineers glanced up with the expression of someone who had been waiting for an opening. We've started calling it something. I already had a feeling. What? He hesitated just long enough to be polite. Bucket of bolts. I smiled. Varos looked between us with the careful attention of someone encountering a cultural reference he had not filed yet. I do not understand. It's a term of affection. It is not. No, I agreed. It's really not. He looked back at the shuttle with the expression of someone taking a thing seriously that did not deserve it. I will improve it. The thing about Varos was that he meant it in the most literal, complete sense possible. If something could be fixed, he would fix it. Not approximately, not adequately, but properly. I stepped back and took in the bay for a moment. The shuttle that should not have worked. A ship unlike anything else in the fleet. A crew assembled from pieces that had no obvious reason to fit together. A Marine detachment now apparently practicing carpentry on the side. Somewhere ahead of us, a clock was already running down. Keep working, I said, and turned toward the lift. We were going to find that base, and we were going to bring someone home. 16 Japanese curry. FTL hums, not something you hear so much as feel, a low, constant resonance that lives somewhere below conscious thought, like the ship is holding its breath for the duration of the jump, and you have learned to hold yours alongside it. I sat in the ready room with the football turning in my hands. Toss, catch, rotate, the same thoughts running the same track. Ice planet, remote base. 3 heel already moving and the gap between us an unknown quantity. I could not do anything about it FTL except think. The door chimed. "Come in." Himura stepped through, and without really thinking about it, I tossed the ball to her. She caught it. Clean, one-handed, without flinching. I blinked. "Didn't know you had hands like that." She tilted her head with something close to amusement. "I'm a doctor. Coordination is something of a requirement." "Fair point." She tossed it back. "What brings you down here?" She leaned lightly against the edge of the desk. "Gibby is making dinner. Japanese curry over rice, steak, carrots, potatoes, onions." I stopped mid-toss. "Now you have my complete attention." The smallest smile crossed her face. "It smells very good." I tossed the ball back to her. "You came all the way to my ready room to deliver the menu?" She caught it. "Maybe." I shook my head. "That's a new one, Nara." The second it left my mouth, I knew. Her name, just her name, without the title in front of it. I had not planned it, and I could not take it back. And for a half-second the room shifted in temperature by some immeasurable amount. She blinked once, then tossed the ball back. "Pete," she said. I caught it, and just like that, something that had been sitting slightly out of alignment clicked into place. Not dramatic, not announced, just real. I rolled the ball slowly between my palms. "All right," I said quietly. "We're doing that now." She did not respond to it directly, just watched me for a moment with the steadiness she had, the kind that made you feel like she had already thought through whatever you were still working out. "I understand, Gibby." I looked up. "Yeah? My family owns a restaurant in Osaka. Okonomiyaki, multi-generational." She paused. "The way he cooks, the way he makes people feel welcome in that galley, it reminds me of that." "That's Gibby. That's just who he is." She tossed the ball again. I caught it. Then she said, with no particular transition, "My first patient was a turtle. I was 10. I stared at her. Its shell was cracked. I patched it carefully. She shaped the gesture with her hands, small, precise, the same hands that caught a football without thinking. "It lived." "Of course it did," I said, and meant it. She looked at me for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required. "Pete, different inflection this time. Carrying something. Thank you for supporting me." "About the Mary." I shook my head slightly. "That wasn't a difficult call." "It was. It mattered." She stepped closer and held out the ball. I reached for it, and when our hands met around it, neither of us moved immediately. Just a second, maybe 2, where the contact was not accidental and neither of us pretended otherwise. We did not say anything, did not need to. Some things do not require language to be understood clearly. I took the ball back and set it on the desk. "All right." I cleared my throat. "Let's go see what this curry is actually about." The smell reached us before we made it into the mess. Rich, warm, deeply spiced, the kind of thing that makes a ship's mess feel briefly like somewhere else entirely. Gibby stood behind the counter with the proprietorial ease of someone who had long since stopped distinguishing between his kitchen and his kingdom. "Right on time." I looked at the trays. "Tell me that's real steak." He made a face that told me everything before he said a word. "Depends on your definition. Gibby. Cow DNA, cultured in a vat." I looked at him for a long moment. "You're killing me." "It's close," he said, with the defensive confidence of a man who believed in the thing he had made. "Not identical, but close enough that you're going to eat the whole plate." He was probably right. "It'll have to do." He pointed to a separate tray. "Made Fevai's version without animal products." Fevai stepped up and examined it with the systematic attention she applied to everything new. "Children's do not consume animal matter." "I know," Gibby said evenly. "That's why there isn't any." She considered this for a moment, then nodded once. "Acceptable. coming from her. That and Akimov acceptable were the two highest forms of culinary praise the crew seemed capable of producing. Varos took his portion without commentary and found a seat, which was his version of enthusiasm. We settled around the table. Same unspoken arrangement as always. No rank, no designated positions, just crew taking up space together. For the time it took to eat, nobody mentioned Three-Heel, or the bass, or the clock running somewhere ahead of us. Just food, and the kind of conversation that does not need to go anywhere to be worth having. At some point I looked around the table and understood something I had not quite articulated before. Himura across from me, Gibby holding court from the galley side, Fevai filing away whatever she was observing, Varos quietly present in the way he always was. This was it. Not just the mission, not just the ship. This, what happened when people chose to sit down together and share something, even when everything outside the hull was complicated and moving fast and uncertain. Connection. Trust built in ordinary moments. The chance to break bread with people you would walk into a hostile installation beside. Even if the steak came from a vat. 17 severed. The wind never stopped. It howled across the frozen surface of the moon in endless sheets, dragging ice crystals over the scarred remains of what had once been a productive extraction site. Helenix, the substance that made faster-than-light travel possible, had been pulled out of this rock until there was nothing left worth pulling. The place had mattered once. Now it was hollow, stripped, abandoned by everyone except the people who needed it that way. The old mine facility still stood, half buried in accumulated ice, reinforced with crude additions that spoke more to necessity than planning. Metal plates welded over original structure. Patched corridors. Improvised systems doing just enough to keep the interior breathable, and the cold outside where it belonged. Inside, something considerably more valuable than Helenix remained. The Miri was held in what had once been a processing chamber, converted, secured, entirely unsuited to him in every meaningful way. The air composition was wrong. The light spectrum was wrong. The geometry of the space was wrong. The silence was unbearable. He shifted, his form adjusting instinctively, searching for something that was not there and would not be. The absence of the hive mind was not simply loneliness. It was a fundamental disorientation, like losing a sense he had never had to consciously use, because it had always simply been there. Every Miri was born into connection the way humans were born into gravity. The removal of it was a kind of pain that had no equivalent in species that had never known what it was to be part of something larger than themselves. When he spoke, it began as a series of sharp, rhythmic clicks, rapid, layered, almost musical in their structural complexity. The universal translator paused, processing, then resolved the sound into language. I do not understand. The voice that emerged sounded young. By human reckoning, he was approximately 3 years old. By Miri standards, he was an adult, but not one who had ever needed to be resilient alone, because alone was not something any Miri was supposed to be. Across the chamber stood his captors. Brown dwarfs, the same mixed composition that had taken him. Human, Lenian, and one Kalar positioned near the back wall, watching everything without contributing, patient and immovable as the ice outside. The one who did most of the talking was human, calm, controlled, the kind of composed that came from practice rather than temperament. He stepped forward. You understand more than you think. The Miri shifted. I wish to return. The human crouched slightly, lowering himself with deliberate care. Of course you do. A brief pause, calibrated. We can help with that. But you have to help us first. The Miri's form tensed. Help how? Your connection, the hive. Tell us how it works, how you communicate across distance. The word landed, and the Miri recoiled from it as though it had weight. "It is gone." The translator caught layered frequencies beneath the words. Fear, specifically, the kind that was not performed. "I cannot hear them." The human's tone adjusted toward something approximating sympathy. "That must be very difficult." He let it sit for a moment. "But it does not have to be permanent." The Miri stilled. "You can restore it?" "We can help you," the human said, redirecting rather than answering. "But we need your cooperation." Behind him, the Lenian operative shifted with the impatience of someone who had already decided this approach was inefficient. "You're wasting time." The human did not acknowledge it. He kept his attention entirely on the Miri, voice steady. "We're not asking you to give anything away. Just explain." The Miri did not respond, did not move, did not yield. The Lenian stepped forward. "He knows what we want." The Kalar spoke for the first time from the back of the room without raising his voice. "Then show him what happens if he refuses." The temperature of the room changed without anyone touching the controls. The human stood slowly, and whatever softness had been in his posture left it. "Listen carefully. You are alone here." "I know," the Miri said quietly. "Good. Then understand this." He leaned forward slightly. "No one is coming for you." A lie, delivered with the precise confidence of someone who had learned that conviction matters more than accuracy. "They will come." The Miri's response was weak, uncertain in a way it would not have been before. Before the silence, before the isolation. The human shook his head. "They don't know where you are." The Miri froze. "No. Yes." The human stepped back, giving the words room to work. "They have already adjusted. That's how your kind functions. Efficient, practical, collective. The collective moves forward." The Miri's form tightened with something unresolvable. Not agreement, not rejection, just the terrible weight of doubt made possible by isolation. Without the hive, there was no immediate counter to the lie. No chorus of certainty to reach for. Just his own conviction, untethered, shrinking in the cold. That is not true. But the certainty had gone out of it. The human stepped back further. "Think about it." The Lenian scoffed under his breath. The Kalar said nothing, watching with the patience of someone who understood that pressure did not always need to be loud to be effective. Then the alert tone cut through the chamber. Sharp, immediate, pulling every head in the room toward the comm panel. Contact. A brief pause. Unidentified shuttle descending from orbit. No clear transponder. The room reorganized itself in seconds. "Whose?" the human demanded. "Unknown." The Kalar moved away from the wall for the first time. Defensive positions. Now. The Lenian was already moving. The human hesitated for just a fraction of a second, something working behind his eyes, then followed. In the sudden disruption, in the shift of attention away from him and toward the threat arriving from above, the Miri felt something. Faint, distant, nothing as substantial as the hive, nothing close to what had been taken from him, but something directional, something that pointed outward rather than inward. Possibility. For the first time since he had been taken from everything he had ever known, something other than silence existed in the space where hope was supposed to be. 18. Extraction. The moon looked dead from orbit. Not peaceful, not quiet, just used up. White ice, black rock, the gas giant hanging overhead like something passing judgment. The old mine base sat half-buried below us. A prefabricated scar left behind when the Hellenics ran out, and whoever built the place decided it wasn't worth maintaining. Which made it perfect. Places like that are always reused by people who don't want to be found. "Approach is clean," Bishop said over comms. "No challenge traffic, no active defense net." "Lazy or confident," Hernandez answered from the bridge. "Assume confident." Always. I kept my hands on the controls as the shuttle dropped lower. Behind me, Kimov and the Marines sat strapped in and sealed. Green battle armor, helmets locked, rifles ready. Himura was across from them in a white EV suit, pistol holstered at her hip, the emergency medical stretcher folded across her back. She looked like she had no business on a combat insertion, which was precisely why she'd insisted on coming. I set us down hard. Go! The hatch dropped and cold white light poured in. Kimov hit the ground first, scanned, and started throwing signals without a word. Spread. Cover flanks. Move. The Marines peeled off with the precision of people who had long since stopped needing to think about the basics. Kimov stayed with Himura and me as we pushed toward the main structure. The first shots came from behind a collapsed loading gantry to our left. Brown dwarfs in sealed combat armor, positioned by someone who understood fields of fire. I dropped to a knee and returned controlled bursts while Kimov pushed the left flank. The Marines worked the cover methodically. No wasted movement, no heroics. Pressure applied in the right places until positions folded. Eleni and Merk broke cover and tried to redirect fire toward Himura. Kimov put him down before I'd finished tracking the angle. Kinetic barrier flaring bright. Failing. The Merc dropping behind his own cover. We punched through the outer line and hit the main entry. One of the Marines blew the lock and we went inside. The base interior was narrow and cold, built for machinery rather than people. Old industrial lighting, reinforced bulkheads, converted processing rooms that still smelled faintly of whatever they'd originally been designed to do. Perfect choke points every 10 meters. We fought room to room. The brown dwarfs fell back in stages, buying time the way professionals do, measured, organized, giving ground without giving up. Kimov's Marines kept them from resetting. Himura stayed tight behind me, pistol up, never wasting a shot. The resistance changed quality when we got close to the holding room. Less organized, more urgent. That told me everything I needed to know about what was behind the next door. I breached it and stepped through. The Miri was inside, and for half a second, the noise outside the room seemed to fall away. He looked wrong in that space. Too delicate, too irreplaceable, like something that had never been designed to exist alone and was visibly suffering the consequences. I lowered my rifle and gestured to Himura. We both switched our visors from reflective to transparent. Friendly, human, non-threatening, or as close to it as two armed people in a breached room could manage. I took a slow step forward. "Hey, I'm Pete Hansen. You're in a pickle and we're here to help." Himura rolled her eyes. The translator lagged, then caught up. "Pickle." "In other words," Himura said, stepping slightly beside me, "you are a hostage, and we intend to get you out." That landed considerably better. The Miri shifted weakly. "Help. That's the plan," I said, keeping my tone easy despite the clock screaming in the back of my head. "We don't have food aboard compatible with your physiology, and the atmosphere outside won't work for you either. Do you have a pressure suit here?" The translator took its time processing. They withheld food to encourage cooperation. Something tightened in my chest. "And the suit?" "I arrived in one. I do not know where they put it. I do not know this structure." Fair enough. He'd been dragged in here half-starved and cut off from the only thing that had ever made him feel like himself. Of course he didn't know the floor plan. My comm crackled. "Hansen, Hernandez, sharp and direct. Radio silence is broken. Fang just arrived in orbit and is launching a shuttle." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "ETA?" "Soon." I looked at Himura. She was already unfolding the medical stretcher from her back. "We can modify this," she said, the calm she brought to everything. Remove the support hardware. It will hold him. It will not be comfortable. She looked at the Miri. Alternatively, we find your pressure suit and locate compatible food. But we don't know where either is, and time is the variable we have least of. Prep the stretcher as contingency, I said. Then I keyed the squad channel. 2 Marines stay here with the doctor and the hostage. I looked at Kemov. We sweep. Airlock first, then storage. He was already moving. We hit the airlock section fast and got either lucky or good, probably some of both. A Miri pressure suit was racked in a side locker, built for anatomy that nothing in human service inventory would ever account for. Ugly in the purely functional way of something designed without any concern for appearance. Got it. Storage, Kemov said. We pushed deeper, fought through another pocket of resistance that was getting more desperate by the minute, and reached what passed for a pantry. Shelving units, cold storage, mixed supplies from what looked like 3 different species procurement chains. Marked and sealed separately. A cluster of packets that looked nothing like anything I'd provisioned before. Favai's voice came over comms from orbit, patched through Singapore's relay. Packaging profiles match Miri nutritional inventory from the recovered database fragments. I grabbed everything. Good enough. Then the squad net exploded. Heavy contact moving outside. 3 Heels shuttle is down. Fall back to the hostage. Move now. We fought back through the base with the suit and rations, brown dwarf fire lighting up every corridor we moved through. Kemov and his Marines held the line through the particular combination of discipline and aggression that made them who they were. We reached the holding room, got the Miri into the pressure suit faster than I thought the timeline allowed, and got him upright with Imura supporting his movement. Then we ran. Outside, the mercs had the approach covered from dug-in positions, firing across the ice from behind wrecked mining equipment. We moved under that fire in short, violent bounds, Marines covering each other, Kemov pulling the line forward through sheer force of will, while I kept the Miri and Himura inside the protected envelope. Hernandez, break stealth, I said into the comm. Rendezvous suborbital on our mark. Emergency extraction, no hesitation. Understood, we hit the shuttle and piled in. Himura got the Miri secured. Kemov and the Marines held the hatch long enough to keep the mercs honest, then sealed it behind them. Then the shadow crossed us. 3 Heels shuttle had landed across the ice. Ramp down. The mercenary fire had cut off the moment it settled. Not because anyone had given an order, but because the people doing the firing understood who had arrived, and what their own weapons were no longer relevant to. I cracked the hatch enough to face him, rifle in hand. He walked across the ice without cover, without a visible weapon, and without hurry. His atmospheric suit was black and unornamented, the kind of finish a species used when it had stopped needing symbolism to project authority. He was tall even by Kellar standards, the sort of frame that rewrote the scale of whatever stood next to it. He stopped at a distance that was not quite respectful and not quite threatening. Calibrated. Everything about him was calibrated. Captain Hansen. The voice came cleanly across the open channel, unhurried, almost conversational. I read your dossier on the way down. Academy record. Command assessments. Your ship. Your crew. The Whisper network was thorough before they burned the relationship. I didn't answer. Answering would have been a concession. He tilted his head slightly, as if something about my silence confirmed something for him. You are not what I expected. That is a compliment for a human, but I have been watching your species for longer than you have been watching mine, and I have formed some conclusions I would like you to hear before you make your next decision. I'm on a clock. I know. That is part of why I am speaking now. Clocks produce clarity. His head turned fractionally toward the shuttle interior, where the Myri was. Then back to me. "Do you know why your species is where it is?" "Hard work," I said. "Stubbornness. Some luck. Some luck." "Yes." Something close to a smile passed over his face and did not stay. "I am familiar with the site on the far side of your moon, Captain. I know what was buried there. I know what your engineers found in it. I know that your FTL drive, your materials science, your power generation, and perhaps a dozen other pillars of your current posture derive from what a group of your scientists pulled from a wreck they did not build and could not have built. I know the wreck has been classified under enough layers to keep your public from asking questions about it for another century. And I know your government believes this is still a secret." The cold came down my spine again. It had nothing to do with the ice. "I am not here to expose you," he said. "I am here to observe that your species was handed its current position. You did not climb to it. You were placed at the foot of a ladder that someone else had already built, and the first 3 rungs were already in your hands when you began to claim you had earned the view." He let that settle. "This is not an insult. Most species in this region have a similar story. The Lenian know theirs. The children suspect theirs. Yours is simply the one still treated as private, by a population that has convinced itself the gift was an achievement. I'm not going to debate Earth history with you on an ice field. No. You are going to give me the Myri, and I am going to allow you to leave with your crew intact." "Not happening. Consider your position." His gaze did not shift. "You have an extraction window of perhaps 90 seconds. I have the only ship in system that can intercept yours during that window. I am prepared not to intercept if we reach an understanding. But there is also the other matter you should weigh before you decide." He raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, the way a man raises a hand when he wants to ensure that the motion is understood to be ceremonial rather than combat. A small case hung from a strap at his hip. He opened it with his thumb. Inside, held in a suspension field, was an object. Even at distance and through glare, I could see it wasn't anything I recognized. And I had spent the last weeks looking at every fragment of imagery the Trappist site had produced. The geometry was wrong in a way that suggested it did not belong to any fabrication method humans, Lenians, or Childrens had ever used. It was small, hand-sized. It absorbed light in places where it should have reflected it. "This came from the Trappist colony site," Thriel said. "Before you arrived in system, before your intelligence services knew the artifact existed, before the object that was buried there had even been catalogued by the survey team that found it. I have had this in my possession for longer than you have known about the larger find. Long enough to understand some things about it that your teams will not understand for years." He closed the case. "The Trappist site is not what your briefings have told you it is. It is not a curiosity. It is not a research opportunity. It is part of a pattern that reaches considerably further back than any institution in your government is currently prepared to acknowledge. And what I am holding here is a piece of that pattern. Your species has been invited to a table you do not yet know exists. Whether you come to that table standing or kneeling depends on decisions you are making right now, on the ice, without the information you would need to make them correctly." He paused, briefly, and something in the paused quality was worse than anything he had said yet. "I am offering information. I am asking for the Myri. The exchange is simple." I didn't take a breath before answering. Over my dead body, the expression that crossed his face was not anger. It was something worse, the calm of a man who had just received useful data. He had asked a question, and I had answered it, and the answer had told him something about me that he would file and use later. "Acknowledged, Captain." His voice did not change register. "I had hoped you would choose differently. I understand why you did not. Your species tends to choose loyalty over leverage, which is admirable, and which is also consistently how you have arrived at positions you then cannot sustain. He took one step back, not retreat. Permission for me to leave. We will speak again. I will ensure it. I sealed the hatch. Bishop, now. The shuttle launched like something had grabbed it from above, because effectively something had. Singapore broke stealth in suborbital approach, and Bishop threaded her descent so precisely that I felt my own ship's shadow pass over us before I saw it on the screen. The grappling system locked with a metallic slam that threw us all sideways, and then we were moving up, fast, into the bay. Clamps engaged, atmosphere cycling. The deck under my boots shuddered as Singapore poured on thrust and committed fully to the run. Fang maneuvering, Hernandez reported, breaking orbit at best speed. Then Bishop, calm and exact as always. FTL solution in 3, 2, 1, space folded. The system vanished behind us. And this time we were the ones who left with something that mattered. I sat down against the bay bulkhead and let my rifle hang loose across my lap. Himura was already kneeling beside the Miri, checking vitals through the pressure suit's diagnostic port. Kimov moved through his Marines without a word, confirming every one of them had come back with him. Nobody was talking. Three-Heel had a piece of something from Trappist. He had had it for longer than any of us had been on this. He had known about the moon, and he had let me leave anyway, which meant he had already decided that letting me go served his purposes better than stopping me would have. That was the part I couldn't stop turning over as the jump settled. Whatever he had in that case, whatever he meant by the table you do not yet know exists. The problem I had come here to solve had just stopped being the problem I was actually in. 19, old blood, new stars. Leniania looked like Earth caught in a memory of winter. Pale, clear skies, dark, cold seas, mountain ranges running sharp under ice and wind, with ancient vegetation clinging to the lower elevations and forests that had decided to outlast everything. The great moon overhead hung at a distance and scale so familiar that human visitors often felt an unease they couldn't quite name. It wasn't Earth, but it had been connected to Earth once, in an age neither species had been awake enough to record, and the fossil evidence had made that impossible to argue away. Inside the diplomatic shuttle descending through the upper atmosphere, Ambassador Amelia Schneider read the same message for the third time. She didn't look like a woman in her late 60s. Medical advances had largely ended visible aging for anyone with early enough access. Schneider wore her years in the kind of stillness she could maintain while processing bad news. Across from her, Captain Chloe Carpenter sat with the relaxed discipline of a career officer. Posture easy but never slack. The physical presence of someone who had spent most of her career being underestimated by people she eventually outranked. She was in her 40s and looked younger, which she'd stopped mentioning because it no longer surprised anyone. The shuttle rode smoothly through the cold upper air, bound from the human embassy to the Lenian clan meeting hall. Schneider lowered the tablet. The latest from Earth hasn't changed the fundamentals. No, ma'am. Schneider's gaze drifted to the window, where ice fields moved slowly beneath them. The Trappist Incident. That's what they're calling it now. Better than whatever Hansen got himself into this week. The faintest smile crossed Schneider's face. Be kind. He hasn't held command long. Carpenter made a soft, skeptical sound. Long enough. The highest priority diplomatic courier from Earth had reached the embassy less than an hour before they'd boarded. Database stolen. Three-Hill implicated. The Miri mail believed recovered by Singapore's crew. Hansen in radio silence since anchor station, likely en route to return the Miri to his own space. Likely. Too much of that word in the report. Schneider pulled up the presidential authorization. Full diplomatic authority, which was rarely a comfort, because it generally meant the people issuing it expected things to deteriorate. They expect this to spread, she said. Carpenter didn't argue the distinction. Schneider closed the tablet and let her eyes settle on the landscape below. White blue under a pale sun. After a moment, 3 generations ago, my grandfather wrote textbooks on hominid evolution. He died believing Neanderthals went extinct on Earth between 40 and 30,000 years ago. The whole discipline did. Climate stress, interbreeding, resource competition, all of it elegant, all of it built on the assumption that what we found in the fossil record was what had happened. And then we met them, Carpenter said. And then we met them. The genetic match wasn't ambiguous. Not even close. Schneider gestured faintly at the window. The Lennians had their own story. Every clan tradition I've read includes a relocation myth. A great moving, a people taken from a green world and carried to a cold one. Earth scholars treated those traditions as cosmology. The Lennians treated them as history. The Lennians were closer to right. Someone moved them, an intelligence we have never identified, operating on a scale we still don't fully understand. They scooped a population of pre-modern hominids off Earth, seeded them on a world capable of sustaining them, and left. No record of why, no record of who, just the act and the descendants of the act, and a pile of fossil evidence on Earth that suddenly read very differently, which collapsed about a century of patient diplomacy into a single afternoon. 2, technically. The first to verify the genetic data. The second to decide how to tell the public. Schneider's mouth moved, not quite a smile. We skipped roughly 50 diplomatic milestones. Trade agreements within months. Joint research within the year. It is hard to maintain proper distance from people you have just discovered, our family. And it's why they trust us further than they probably should. Their entire origin narrative was waiting on a confirmation. We arrived carrying it. A beat. It is also why the database matters. If someone moved the Lennians off Earth, the question that follows is what else they did, whether the children's were also redirected, whether any species in this region developed independently, or whether all of us are someone's experiment. Nobody is willing to lose track of an artifact that may speak to that, which is why the human captain currently moving fastest toward whatever comes next is going to be the most watched person in the region by tomorrow morning. The shuttle began its descent. No honor guard waited below. No ceremonial overflight. That had been the Lennian clan leader Haros's preference, and Schneider appreciated it. They were led through broad corridors of stone and engineered timber and into the meeting chamber without delay. The children Ambassador Holkson was already seated, looking faintly absurd in a chair built for Lennian dimensions without appearing to notice. Posture immaculate, hands folded, face cultivated into the unreadability that children's developed as a professional habit. At the far end, Haros sat with the stillness of someone who had been 90 years old long enough to stop being impressed by urgency. He rose only slightly as the humans entered, then gestured them to their places. Tea had already been prepared, in low cups sized for human hands as easily as Lennian ones. "It is from a plant your species once knew," Haros said, "before either of ours remembered these stars." Schneider took the cup and inhaled. Earthy, dry, familiar in a way that had no clear referent. He didn't linger. "We have been informed that the alien database discovered at the Trappist colony was stolen. You have an update?" Schneider set the cup down. "The latest courier from Earth confirms Thriel's involvement. We also have strong indication that Captain Hansen and the Singapore crew have recovered the Miri mail, and that Hansen is moving to return him to Miri space without conditions. The children ambassador's ears shifted fractionally forward. Believed, Singapore has maintained radio silence since Anchor Station. Available intelligence supports the conclusion. Harris absorbed it without visible reaction. If so, it is a dangerous choice. It is also the correct one, Carpenter said. His gaze moved to her. You are certain? No, sir. I'm military. We're never certain. But I know Hansen. She folded her hands behind her back. I served as Rear Admiral Blackwell's XO when he came out of the academy. Even then, he'd rather ask forgiveness than wait for permission. I gave him more dressing downs than I can count, and he earned every one. But there are advantages to an officer who thinks outside the box, particularly when the box is on fire. Harris produced a low sound that might have been amusement, and now he commands a prototype with Lenian and Children crew aboard, Rolkson observed. Which is precisely why I am here, Schneider said. Harris rested one hand on the arm of his chair. Our peoples shared Earth once. That is no longer theory. We have seen the evidence. Your ancestors and mine lived under the same sky. Schneider nodded. And we still do not know, Rolkson added quietly, whether our own history was similarly altered, whether our development was redirected, as theirs was. That sat heavily in the chamber. The database had ceased to be merely a scientific object. It had become a question hanging over every major species in the region. Which is why Three Heel matters as much as the database itself, Schneider said. He won't operate in isolation indefinitely. The Kalar government may not sanction what he's done, but they will be forced to reckon with the implications. And the Miri, Harris said. Yes. Particularly if Hansen is genuinely returning the mail without conditions. That changes the calculus considerably. The Children ambassador's hands tightened slightly. The Whisper Network is watching. Anchor Station is watching. The Brown Dwarfs are watching. The Concord Wardens are certainly watching. Carpenter allowed a dry half-smile. And probably placing bets. Nobody laughed. Nobody disagreed either. Schneider brought Hansen's dossier up on the central display. Fast-tracked. Unconventional. High initiative. Elevated improvisational bias. Above-threshold tactical adaptability. Rolkson read it in silence. Your captain is not standard issue. No, Carpenter said. He never was. Harris looked from the file to Schneider, and yet he was given command of your most significant prototype. Schneider met his gaze, because this was not a mission for a standard officer. A long pause settled over the chamber. Outside, a sun gave light without warmth across the frozen landscape. The moon hung overhead in the way of things inherited from a shared past nobody had finished understanding. Inside, 3 species sat in a room built on shared uncertainty, talking around the edges of a problem none of them could yet see the full shape of. Whatever had been buried in the past was still consequential enough to reshape the future, and the person currently moving fastest toward that future was a human captain who had never once waited for permission to do what he thought was right. The problem wasn't getting smaller. It was widening quietly and deliberately, the way the deepest problems always did. 20 connections. A few hours after we left that ice ball behind, the adrenaline finally wore off. That's always the dangerous part. Not the firefight, not the extraction, not staring down a Keelar warlord across a frozen field. It's the quiet after, when your brain starts replaying everything you didn't have time to think about in the moment. So I did what I usually do when that started. I went to find people. The mess was still lit, and something warm was already in the air before I stepped inside, which meant Gibby had been busy. That helped more than I would admit out loud. Bishop was off duty at one of the tables, dressed down in a Naval Academy t-shirt and sweatpants, her blonde hair loose instead of pulled back in the bun she wore on the bridge. Across from her sat Favai and Varos, both locked in the kind of analytical focus that meant they were working through a problem. Bishop had a tablet propped up and was gesturing with the conviction of someone making a point she believed in. "I'm telling you," she said. "It works." Varos frowned. "It is inefficient. It's familiar, and that counts for something." Favai tilted her head. "Familiarity is not an optimal design principle. Depends on your species. Humans like what we know. We build on it instead of replacing it." I leaned against the bulkhead and listened without announcing myself. Bishop tapped the screen, bringing up a keyboard layout. "QWERTY. We've been using this since the 1870s. Varos stared. "You have maintained the same input system for over 3 centuries while advancing your technology by approximately 300 years in less than 1 century. "Yep." "Why?" Bishop grinned. "Because it works." Favai's voice stayed calm. "You previously stated it was originally designed to slow typing speed and prevent mechanical failure in early devices. That was for typewriters. Old mechanical systems? Keys would jam if you typed too fast. The layout was a workaround for hardware limitations that no longer exist." Varos looked at her steadily. "And you retain the workaround, not a workaround anymore. A standard—" I laughed quietly. Bishop noticed and rolled her eyes. Wouldn't dream of it." I pushed off the wall and walked in. "You're doing great." "Thank you," she said, in the tone that meant the opposite. "I'm explaining why humans are stubborn." Favai glanced over at me. "Captain Hansen, is this an accurate characterization?" "Completely." I pulled out a chair. "We invent revolutionary things and then keep one completely arbitrary thing exactly the same so we don't have to relearn it." Varos considered that. "This is irrational. Welcome to humanity," Bishop said. She flicked the display, bringing up a schematic. Same principle applies to the bridge layout. It still looks a lot like a glass cockpit from early 21st century aviation. "Airbus A350, more or less, if you want a reference point." Favai leaned forward slightly. "Why replicate an interface that predates the technology it now controls?" "Because pilots already understood it," Bishop said. "When everything accelerated after the moon artifact. 3 centuries of development compressed into under 100 years. There wasn't time to reinvent every human interface from scratch. So we kept what people already knew how to use and upgraded the systems underneath." "Continuity," I said. "Exactly. You change the engine. You keep the steering wheel." Varos nodded slowly, filing it away as irrational but functional. "This reduces training time and operational error during transition periods." "Now you're getting it," Bishop said, pointing at him. Favai's focus shifted slightly inward. "So human design consistently prioritizes cognitive comfort over pure optimization. Most of the time." She filed that away too, cataloging it however her mind worked. I left them to it and moved toward the med bay. The doors opened quietly onto a scene that had been going on for a while. Himura was crouched beside the Miri, her movements calm and precise as she checked the improvised support frame we had rigged for his anatomy. Gibby stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with the focused attention he gave anything he took responsibility for. The Miri was still in the pressure suit, resting against the frame, looking fragile even with it on. Gibby glanced up. "If he could eat it, I'd give him a bowl of gumbo." "You'd open with gumbo on a species we barely understand." "Food fixes most things, or at least makes them easier to sit with." "Not in this case," Himura said without looking up, adjusting her readings. "The rations we recovered are compatible, nutritionally stable, roughly equivalent to military field provisions." I leaned against the wall. "So we pulled him from a hostile spot and fed him MRAs." Gibby shook his head gravely. "That's a tragedy. You two are starting to sound like mother hens." Himura looked at me with the steadiness of someone who would not dignify that with more than a look. Gibby just smiled. "You keep them safe, Captain. We keep them fed. Fair division of labor." The Miri shifted slightly, slow, deliberate movement. Then the clicking started, layered and rapid. The translator lagged in a way it usually didn't. "Connection. Attempting." Himura leaned closer. "He's trying to reach the hive." The clicking grew sharper and faster for several seconds, then stopped. The Miri's posture relaxed slightly with the effort. "Lost." Himura checked his readings. That required significant exertion. I crouched down to his level. "You don't have to push that hard." His head tilted toward me. "I must inform them. I understand. And you will?" I kept my voice even. "But not by burning yourself out before we get you home. You're no good to them. Or to yourself, if you collapse in transit." A pause. Then, understood. "When you can make the connection, even briefly, tell them this. We mean you no harm. We're taking you back to your people." The translator caught up. "No harm. Return. That's the plan. Rest until then." He went quiet. Himura adjusted his position against the frame. Gibby stepped back to give them room, which was its own kind of consideration. I stood a moment longer, listening to the steady hum of the ship around us. FTL. Constant and even the background feeling you stop noticing until the quiet reminds you. Somewhere ahead was Miri space. Behind us, Three Hill, and whatever else was coming. "Keep me posted." Himura nodded once. Gibby gave me the small, certain grin of someone who had already decided how this would go. "We got him, Captain." I believed him. Right now, that was enough. 21. Ghost Trace. The ice moon had already begun to erase the battle. Wind swept across the frozen surface in harsh sheets, smoothing footprints, softening impact craters, burying evidence beneath fresh layers of frost and dust. What had unfolded here hours before might as well have been years ago, except for the traces the wind could not touch. Heat lingering in scorched metal, microscopic scratches on bulkheads, faint energy patterns that whispered of recent activity to anyone who knew how to listen. Frolkson knew how to listen. His shuttle arrived without fanfare. No fiery descent, no blazing trail. It slipped through the upper atmosphere in a silent, controlled glide, emitting almost nothing, and settled on the frost-bitten ground, near the abandoned mining facility, with no more disturbance than the slight displacement of frost beneath its struts. The hatch opened quietly. Volkson stepped out alone, moving with the precise economy that defined him in the field. His form was compact, his suit engineered for vacuum and covert work. Where most species in his profession relied on intimidation, size, armor, presence, Volkson relied on being right. He had been correct often enough that fear was a redundancy his employers had stopped requiring. His scanner swept the landscape in slow, invisible arcs, painting layered data across his field of vision. Kinetic barrier discharge patterns, concentrated energy weapon impacts, residual heat signatures from recent shuttle landings, compressed footfall imprints in the ice indicating numerous, tightly spaced contact points. Combat. Recent. Professional. Human, he murmured. The evidence had already declared as much. He spoke the word for his own confirmation, the way a man checks his work aloud before moving on. He advanced toward the structure. The mining facility wore its history openly. Fresh scars layered atop old corrosion, patched walls reinforced by occupants who had planned to stay longer than they did. The entryway had been breached cleanly, not shattered, not blasted open. Opened, with the efficiency of someone who knew how to solve a problem without creating a second one. Volkson stepped through. Inside, thin, stale air hung beneath flickering, inconsistent lighting, damaged or neglected systems failing to maintain full function. He paused just inside the threshold and activated his passive sensors. No active life signs, no lingering communications, no automated defenses still operational. Abandoned, but not empty of information. He moved deeper. The corridors told their story the way a battlefield always told its story to a patient observer. Positions taken and lost. Strategic angles of fire established and broken. Points where resistance had been tenacious, then folded. The brown dwarfs had fortified intelligently. Layered defenses, fallback positions, the signs of professional training rather than improvisation. The humans had dismantled those defenses with precision. Minimal collateral damage. No corridors blown open when a single charge would do. Vrokson tilted his head. Intentional, he murmured. Restraint under pressure spoke to character before it spoke to capability. A team that broke this kind of professional defense without overkill was a team that had already calculated what kind of impression it wanted to leave. He reached the holding chamber. Confirmation was not necessary. The traces spoke clearly. Biological residues unique to Muri physiology. Imprints left by the male's pressure suit on support structures. A faint, lingering atmospheric distortion alien to known baselines. He crouched and scanned the floor with heightened resolution. Markers of prolonged isolation. Signs of nutritional deprivation. The signature of containment without care, not torture, but deliberate neglect, the kind a professional captor used when the prisoner needed to remain useful but not comfortable. He rose. They took him alive, in poor condition, he said softly. And someone else took him out. The second fact carried more weight than the first. He moved to the data core. The room had been wiped clean. Deliberately, thoroughly, with professional precision. To most observers it would be a dead end. To Vrokson it was an invitation. He connected directly to the system. The interface resisted briefly, then yielded. Root access, he whispered. The system appeared empty as intended. No intact databases, no clean files, no obvious logs. But data never truly vanished. It fragmented. It echoed. It left residual traces in the architecture. Ghosts waiting for someone patient and skilled enough to assemble them. He began the reconstruction. Pattern recognition, signal recovery, memory mapping. The careful work of restoring a damaged painting rather than inventing what had been lost. Fragments reformed. Corrupted files stabilized into partial text. Logs surfaced from the noise. Then video. At first distorted, incomplete, broken across frames. With patience the footage clarified. A room. Movement. Humans. One figure stood out, centered, steady, in command. The others instinctively followed him. Peter Hansen, Vrokson said, matching the image to intelligence records. The footage continued. The Muri male. Alive. Weakened. Mobile. Extraction under fire. Efficient. Coordinated. The team moved with the Muri integrated into their tactics, not handled as a liability. Playback ended. Silence returned. For a long moment Vrokson did not move. They were not here for the database, he said. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. An opportunistic attacker would have taken intelligence as a secondary objective. Hansen's team had not. Either the database was not their priority, or they had already acquired what they needed elsewhere, or their discipline excluded extraneous targets. Any of those was significant. He disconnected. The reconstructed data collapsed back into emptiness. Outside, the wind swept across the ice, erasing more traces, restoring the moon's indifferent surface. He had what he needed. Humans, a rescued Muri male, a timeline, a trajectory clear enough without special insight. They will return him, he said quietly, his eyes on the storm moving across the horizon. Not hope, not assumption, probability, and high probability. The behavior profile suggested a crew unlikely to use the Miri as leverage and willing to risk a great deal to prevent that outcome, which meant Miri space, which meant a narrow set of possible routes. Volkson looked up. The gas giant's red glow filled the upper sky, stars hidden behind it. Singapore was out there. A prototype vessel, a human captain under scrutiny, a situation outgrowing a simple retrieval. He stepped back into the shuttle, the hatch sealed, the engines hummed. Quiet, efficient, purposeful. "I will find you," he said. The shuttle lifted, climbed, and vanished into the storm, leaving the ice moon to its forgetting. 22, breaking bread. We stayed dark. Stealth systems running, emissions low, moving as fast as Singapore could without painting ourselves across every sensor in the system. Bishop had us threaded through a trajectory that kept our profile tight and unpredictable, which meant long stretches of nothing. No outside chatter, no updates, no way to know what was waiting ahead except that we would find out when we got there. So for a while we did something else. We acted like a crew. The mess was louder than usual, not chaotic. Just alive in a way the ship sometimes forgot to be when things got complicated. The reason for that was standing behind the galley counter, like he was conducting something rather than cooking it. I still don't know how Gibby pulled it off with standard ship stores, but somehow he had turned what we had into a full Cajun spread. Steam rolled off the pots in layers of spice and heat, reaching you before you finished stepping through the doorway. Even Varos had stopped questioning the proceedings and accepted that whatever was happening was significant enough to participate in without analysis. "Captain," Gibby said, spotting me. "Right on time. Smells like you're trying to start a diplomatic incident. That's the plan. Win them over with food. Worked on me," Bishop said from her seat. Still in the academy t-shirt and sweatpants, but looking considerably more like herself than she had a few hours ago. Comfortable, relaxed, the sharpness still there underneath. Favai sat across from her, studying the bowl in front of her with the focused attention she brought to anything she had not encountered before. "That one's yours," Gibby told her, pointing. "Vegan gumbo. Made it so you don't keel over on me." Favai leaned slightly toward the bowl. "It is aromatic." "That's one word for it," Bishop muttered. Varus was already eating, slower than a human would, methodical, but consistent enough that I read it as approval. From him, that was essentially a standing ovation for the kitchen. Then my eyes moved to the other end of the table. The Miri sat in a modified chair. We had removed the center portion to give his abdomen room, which was not elegant, but worked. Himura had cleared him to leave the med bay under a single condition. Don't push it. A mobile monitor was attached and feeding readings back to her tablet. The suit supported him where it could, but neither the suit nor the chair had been designed with comfort as the objective. He sat still, movement slow and deliberate, in front of a portion of the rations we had recovered from the base. Not much to look at, not much to smell, but compatible, and right now that was what mattered. Gibby stood nearby with his arms crossed, his expression softer than it usually was when he was running the galley. "I'd offer you gumbo," he said, "but I got a feeling that wouldn't end well for either of us." The translator lagged a moment, then caught up. "I do not process your food." "Yeah," Gibby said. "We're working on that long term." The Miri consumed a portion of the rations with careful, precise efficiency. No enjoyment in it, just function. The way you would fuel a system rather than feed a person. Gibby watched it for a moment. Then he pulled a chair over and sat down across from him with the unhurried ease of someone who had spent his life making people feel less alone at tables. "Food's supposed to be better than that." The Miri's head tilted slightly. "Better?" "Yeah." Gibby gestured around the room. Bishop and Varro's mid-argument about something. Fevi asking a question that was probably going to get her diplomatically redirected. Himura monitoring everything quietly without interrupting any of it. Every culture we brought out here from Earth kept some version of this. Didn't matter where they were from originally. He tapped the table lightly, breaking bread. Sharing a meal. Shared consumption. More than that, Gibby said. It's how we connect. How we slow down long enough to remember we're not just the job. I leaned against the bulkhead and listened without interrupting. There are moments when Gibby does not need anything added to what he is saying. The Miri looked around the room again. Longer this time. More deliberate. You simulate connection. Gibby shook his head. We build it. Something shifted in the Miri's posture. Not a physical adjustment. Something interior. Himura glanced at her monitor. He hasn't attempted reconnection, she said quietly. Good. He shouldn't be pushing it yet. He understands that. I moved to the table and sat down off to the side of the Miri rather than directly across. Less pressure that way. How are you holding up? The clicking started again, softer than before. Stable. Good. When you're ready to try again, you try. No timeline on it. I must reach them, I know. And you will. I gestured lightly around the mess. But right now you're here. With us. His head tilted in that way I was starting to recognize as attention rather than confusion. This is your hive. I thought about it for a second. Something like that. Nobody said anything for a moment after that. Just the ordinary sounds of people eating and talking, which felt extraordinary in context. Moving faster than light with a rescued Myri aboard. Running dark through a system we did not fully control. And the most real thing happening was Gibby's gumbo and an argument Bishop was probably right about. Bishop raised her glass. To not dying today. Varros looked at her. That outcome was not previously in serious question. It's always in question, you just don't always know it at the time. Gibby chuckled. Fevi lifted her bowl in careful imitation of the gesture. To continued survival. That works. I looked over at Himura. She met my eyes for a moment, quiet. Understood the kind of acknowledgement that does not need words because the words would just be in the way. The Miri watched all of it, carefully, the way he watched everything, trying to construct a framework for something he had never encountered before. Connection, he said softly. Not to the hive, not yet, but something. For the first time since we had pulled him out of that frozen facility, he did not look quite so alone at the table. After dinner was over and we had cleaned up the mess, I was walking through it when I caught the look on Hernandez's face. Not her mission face. The other one. She was scrolling through her personal feed. Jaw tight, thumb moving with the restlessness of someone looking for something she already knows is not there yet. I slowed without quite stopping. The way you do when you are not sure if someone wants company or silence. Gibby was already across from her, which meant the situation was being handled the only way he knew how to handle things, by being present. I'm missing my sister's wedding, Hernandez said, not looking up. It was 3 days ago, maybe 4, and I won't see the pictures for another week at least. Gibby leaned back in his chair. That's the real cost of deep space deployment. Only the most critical information rides on a courier drone. The rest gets transferred from ship to ship until the update reaches you. I recognize that tone. He had given some version of that observation before, probably more than once, to more than one person. It was not dismissive. Gibby simply understood that sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is acknowledgement that what they are feeling is real and earned and shared. Hernandez tapped past a news article about something that had already resolved itself, Past an argument between friends whose resolution had arrived days before the argument did. Past headlines reporting crises that were either over or worse by now, and impossible to know which. Her jaw worked. "Missed my niece's graduation last spring," she said quietly, stopping on a photo. Young woman in cap and gown, someone's whole moment frozen in a 4-day-old image that Hernandez was only now receiving. Gibby pulled his chair a little closer. "My nephew turned 8 last month. I sent him a birthday message and a gift certificate. He'll probably get it just in time for his next birthday." He said it without self-pity, just the fact of it. His comm pinged. He glanced down and gave a small, crooked smile. "My sister just announced she's pregnant. Message timestamp, 4 days ago." Hernandez looked up at the viewport. At the stars. At the silence that did not care what had happened back home or when. "Feels like I'm watching a ghost feed." Gibby nodded. "That's how it is out here. News travels at the speed of ships, not signals. The galaxy's big, real big, and the faster you go, the slower the world seems to move." She took a long sip of her coffee, both hands around the mug. "Guess I'm just not used to waiting. None of us are." I stood there for a moment longer, far enough back that neither of them had noticed me. Then I turned and headed back toward the bridge without saying anything, because this was not a moment that needed a captain in it. It was a moment that needed Gibby. And Gibby had it. The Miri had been trying to stay in contact with his hive. Hernandez was trying to stay in contact with hers. Different mechanisms. Same problem. The galaxy did not care which species was reaching for what. Distance was distance, and at some point everyone aboard this ship had learned to live with it, or was learning now. 23. Fracture. The Fang did not drift. It held position in the dark the way a predator conserves energy. Silent, restrained, coiled beneath layers of ablative armor and kinetic shielding that had seen considerably more use than most ships of its class ever would. Inside, the stillness had a different quality. Tighter. Controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is being felt by everyone in the room. Trujillo stood alone in his quarters, studying a tablet without moving. The room reflected him without being designed to. Functional surfaces, clean lines, nothing present that did not serve a purpose. The only personal elements were deliberate. A weapons rack in meticulous order. A few relics from past campaigns that did not need to be displayed but were, and the central table where the tablet cast pale light across the otherwise dim space. Data scrolled across the screen. Encrypted blocks, partial translations, fragments that persistently refused to resolve into anything coherent or actionable. The alien database. The operation had been executed precisely. Resistance eliminated, position secured, objective acquired without significant complication. And yet the thing sat in his possession, as opaque as the moment they had taken it. His cryptographers had been working without interruption since acquisition. Every available resource redirected. Every known decryption methodology applied in sequence and in combination. They had broken nothing. Not truly. They understood the database no better now than when they had first lifted it from the ground on Trappist 1. Incompetence, Trujillo said quietly. Not an outburst, a diagnosis. The tablet flickered as another attempt logged another failure. Movement at the door. He did not turn. Enter. The hatch opened, and one of his underlings stepped in. Human, armored, posture rigid in a way that communicated unease without intending to. Trujillo noted it and said nothing. "There is a communication, sir, from whom?" Sarikval. That name carried a different weight than most. The head of the brown dwarfs. Not a subordinate, not an ally, not anything that fit a simple category. Trujillo's eyes narrowed fractionally. Continue. He is requesting a meeting. Sagittarius I, Anchor Station. A brief pause. Elias Vance will also be present. That was worse than the first part. Threehill said nothing immediately. The room seemed to tighten by a degree around him. Does the communication specify the purpose? No, sir. Of course not. That would have required a directness that neither Sarek Vall nor Elias Vance had ever found useful. Threehill's gaze returned to the tablet. The data. The failure. The accumulating delay between acquiring the objective and being able to use it. The Whisper network had burned him. The humans had taken the Myri. The database remained locked against every tool he had applied to it. And now the head of the brown dwarfs, whose people had failed to hold the position, failed to secure the Myri, failed to anticipate Hansen's interference, wanted a conversation at a location controlled by a man who never showed up to anything without an angle prepared. His hand moved to the tablet. For a moment, he held it the way a man holds something he has decided to break. The casing flexed slightly under the pressure of his fingers. Not enough to fracture, enough to register what would happen if he allowed it. Then he set the tablet down on the table. Carefully. The motion was as controlled as everything else in the room, and the careful was where the violence lived. The underling did not move or speak. Good. Threehill exhaled once, slow and measured. The impulse had arrived and been refused, the way most of his impulses had been refused over a career built on refusing them. It told him something about where his patience currently sat that the impulse had arrived at all. He stepped back from the table without taking his eyes off the tablet, as though something in it might still answer the question if he simply outweighted it. They failed to secure the Myri, he said, voice low and even. Failed to hold the position, failed to anticipate interference that any competent operator should have planned for. He looked up. And now their leader requests a meeting. Yes, sir? Sarek Vall does nothing without purpose. Elias Vance does nothing without positioning himself for advantage. Threehill's attention shifted slightly, not away from the tablet, but adjacent to it. Their presence together in the same room, requesting the same conversation, is not a coincidence, which made the meeting either a leverage play, a trap, or, most likely, an attempt to be both simultaneously, with the balance determined by how the conversation went. Prepare the ship. We divert to Anchor Station. Yes, sir. And the database. Threehill did not turn from the table. Reassign all available personnel to decryption. Double the current effort. The underling hesitated, barely but present. We are already operating at maximum capacity. Then exceed it, not raised, not repeated, final. The hesitation vanished. Yes, sir. The underling turned and exited, the hatch sealing behind him with a soft mechanical shift. Threehill stood alone again in the quiet he had made. He looked once more at the tablet on the table. Data, power, opportunity, all of it locked behind something that had not yielded to anything he had applied to it. That was the condition he found genuinely intolerable, more than the Myri extraction, more than the Whisper Network's betrayal. He could respond to opposition. He could not respond to a wall. His finger touched the casing once where his grip had flexed it. The slight deformation was visible only to someone who had held it. He registered it without satisfaction. Then he pulled his hand back. The control had held. The control would continue to hold. That, too, was a thing he had built his career on. They will not stay ahead of me, he said quietly. Not the humans. Not Hansen. Not the Whisper Network. Not Sarek Vall with his request framed as courtesy. The distance between action and consequence always closed eventually. That was the reliable constant he had built a career on. When it closed this time, he intended to be the one holding the terms. Outside, the fang shifted its position with a controlled burst of thrust, a new vector burning silently into the dark. Anchor station, where information moved between people who had learned that selling it was safer than keeping it, where power gathered in the specific form it took when it had no interest in being legitimate, where the mistakes of people who underestimated the room had a reliable way of becoming permanent. Three-Heel had never underestimated a room in his life. He did not intend to start now. 24, laughter in the dark. The next day felt almost normal, which, under the circumstances, meant we were running stealth at FTL with a rescued alien, whose species communicated across interstellar distances in ways we still did not fully understand. So naturally, we leaned into the almost. It was Gibby's idea. The mess had been transformed into something like a theater. Lights dimmed, one of the forward bulkheads repurposed as a screen, chairs arranged loosely. Not quite organized, not pretending otherwise, but it worked. Gibby always made it work. Most of the off-duty crew filtered in and claimed space. Not seats, space. Bishop had a chair near the back, feet propped up on the one beside her, daring anyone to say otherwise. Nobody did. Varos sat upright, hands on knees, like he was attending a briefing that had gone wildly off script. Fevai leaned forward, the focused attention she brought to anything new already engaged. Gibby stood at the back, arms loose, a satisfied grin on his face. Hosting. All right, this is a classic. You say that about everything, not like this one. He gave me a look. Trust me, that phrase from Gibby could mean two very different things, and experience told me I would not know which until it was too late to do anything about it. Popcorn made its way through the room. Actual popcorn. At some point I had stopped asking how he sourced it from standard ship supplies. Some questions just do not have good answers. Bishop caught a piece clean out of the air. If this is bad, she said, gesturing at the screen, I'm blaming you directly. You're welcome in advance, Gibby replied. Fevai examined a kernel with mild curiosity, then looked down at her own container. Calibrated for her physiology, efficient and nutrient-dense, probably flavorless. This is not nutritionally optimal. No, Bishop said without looking away. But it's spiritually necessary. Varos looked between them. I do not understand the distinction. You will? He did not look convinced. At the far end of the room, the Miri rested in the modified chair we had built around his body, supported by the suit while Himura's tablet tracked every vital in real time. He was eating slowly and deliberately, watching, not the screen but us. Building context, the way he always did. The lights dimmed. The film started. Galaxy Quest. Gibby folded his arms, satisfied with himself. This, he said quietly, is going to explain a lot about humans. I genuinely doubt that the film rolled, actors playing heroes, a story within a story, until the line between performance and reality faded. Then the turn, the moment the main character realizes he is no longer on a set, no longer in fiction, and he has to convince people who have watched him fake sincerity for years that this time he means it. Bishop laughed first. Short, sharp, genuine. Yeah, that tracks. Fevai tilted her head toward the screen. The humor comes from the mismatch in perceived reality between the central figure and everyone else. That's one way to put it. Varos leaned forward, focus sharpening. They do not believe him because his past behavior showed a consistent pattern of insincerity. Bishop pointed at him. There it is. On screen, the argument escalated. No one was willing to accept what was happening until reality forced the issue. The transport. The moment understanding catches up, whether anyone is ready or not. Varos nodded once. This is the point where their perception matches reality. Reality tends to do that. Then came a sound behind us. Not from the film. The Miri. His clicking started again, but different. Faster. Layered. Deliberate. Not just effort. Intent. Himura checked her tablet. He's attempting to connect. The room went still. Even Gibby stopped. The clicking grew into something structured, closer to language than anything we had heard from him. Then it stopped. His posture relaxed, noticeably more than it had when he tried before. "Connection established," the translator said. "How long?" "Limited duration." Himura looked up. Stronger than before, but still wearing him out. The clicks resumed, slower and deliberate. "Queen is aware, rescued." I glanced at Hernandez. She was already there. "The Queen will send an envoy." I return. "Envoy accompanies." "Accompanies where?" "Observer?" "Interface." "Until resolution." Favai did not look away from the Miri. "A diplomatic observer embedded with the crew." "Yeah, that fits." The Miri paused. "Neutral territory requested." "Wolf 359, Hernandez said. The room turned toward her. "Unclaimed system. No permanent settlements, no territorial claims. The lowest risk for escalation." I held the moment for a beat before answering. Wolf 359 was a clean choice on the surface. Empty space. No government to register an objection. Nothing in system that could turn an exchange into an incident. But empty also meant unwitnessed. If this went sideways, if Three Heel arrived early, if the Miri envoy came in heavy, if a Concord warden decided to insert itself, there would be no neutral observers to verify what had happened. Just our logs, their logs, and whatever survived to file them. I ran the alternatives. Seoul looked like leverage. Lenny and Space put allies on the hook for an outcome they had not signed up for. Anchor Station was where Three Heel was probably already heading. Every other neutral system carried a settlement, a faction, or a registry that complicated the math. Wolf 359 was the answer. The risks it carried were ones we could prepare for. The risks the alternatives carried were not. Wolf 359 it is, I said. Good call. Hernandez nodded once, the small acknowledgement of an officer who had not assumed the answer was hers. I moved to the wall console. Bridge. Drop us out of FTL. Prepare a high-priority courier drone. My logs, Himura's medical reports, Miri status. Include intent to rendezvous at Wolf 359 for exchange. Miri mail for designated envoy. Acknowledged, Captain. Once the drone launches, set course for Wolf 359 and resume FTL. Aye. With no real-time FTL communications, I knew I would have to ask forgiveness later if this went sideways. That was the cost of operating out here. You made the decision, launched the drone, and found out whether Houston agreed somewhere between two systems in a week. I crouched beside the Miri. If you can reach them again, tell them Wolf 359. Neutral ground. He tilted his head, processing, not confused. I was learning to tell the difference. Wolf 359. Understood. Behind us, the film played on. The crew on screen had finally accepted the reality they had been pulled into. No script, no safety net. Just the question of who they would become now that the fiction had ended. Bishop glanced at the screen, then at me. A little on the nose. A little, out here you do not always get the moment when things become real. Sometimes you are already past it, committed, moving in a direction you did not fully choose, carrying the weight of decisions made before you finished making them. By the time you understand what it means, you do not get to stop. You keep going, hoping you were right. 25, the field. Eden didn't look like a frontier world. It looked like memory. Rolling hills softened by coastal wind. Terraced stone walls built by hands that had understood the land before building on it. Narrow paths worn into the landscape by generations of feet and animals moving the same routes until the earth simply accepted them as permanent. The sea stretched out in deep, endless blue beyond the cliffs, crashing against a jagged shoreline that made large-scale farming difficult, and had shaped everything about how the people here lived. It was beautiful. It was also entirely intentional. The community sat along the cliff tops like something from an old painting. Stucco homes, tiled roofs, smoke rising from chimneys into coastal air. No satellites crossed the sky. No ships broke the atmosphere. Technology existed here, but only as far as the people who lived here chose to allow it. Steam engines, iron tools, beasts of burden. Nothing beyond what they had decided was consistent with the life they were building. Abraham Thompson believed in that more than most. He stood in the field with his hands wrapped around the wooden handles of the plow, guiding it forward as the ox pulled with the unhurried strength of an animal that had done this enough times to stop resisting the work. Sweat had darkened his shirt, despite the coastal breeze. The sun high enough that the labor had become honest in the way physical work becomes honest when you can no longer pretend it is easy. Behind him the soil turned, not rich, but workable, which was all the land owed anyone. His sons moved nearby in their established positions, each one knowing his place in the rhythm without being reminded. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, David, Solomon, all 5 of them, born within months of each other, to different mothers and raised together without distinction, brothers in every sense that mattered in this community. "Keep the line straight," Abraham called without turning. "We are," Jacob answered. "You drift left." "We adjust," Joseph said. Abraham allowed himself a small, private smile. They were learning, and learning correctly, which was the only progress that held. This field mattered beyond the work. The community council had approved its expansion. More land, higher yield, greater stability for the household, and for the larger settlement. Wheat and barley planted right would carry people through a winter that did not care about plans. Measurable, grounded, earned with hands rather than inherited from machines. The plow moved forward. Wood creaked. Iron bit into soil, the ox leaned into the harness, and stopped. Abrupt and final, hooves pressing into the earth, as the animal resisted with the particular stubbornness of something that has decided not to continue. Abraham eased the pressure on the handles and stepped forward, pulling gently on the reins. The ox snorted, shifting its weight but not moving. Something in the ground ahead had changed. He crouched and brushed loose soil aside with his hand, expecting what he usually found. A buried boulder, an old root, the remnant of something the earth had swallowed generations ago. "Jacob, fetch the shovels." The boys moved quickly. Metal bit into the earth around the obstruction, dirt falling away layer by layer in the practiced rhythm of people who had done this before. Isaac stopped first. The silence was immediate enough that the others noticed. "Father," he said quietly. Abraham looked up. Isaac was not digging. He was staring at what the shovel had uncovered with the expression of someone whose category for the thing in front of them has just failed to load. Abraham stepped closer. The exposed surface was not stone. It was smooth in a way stone wasn't. No grain, no fracture lines, no imperfection where weather or pressure or time had worked on it. The material reflected the afternoon light with a quality that felt wrong, but Abraham could not have said precisely why. Not polished, not natural, something made by a process and with a purpose that had nothing to do with anything in this field or this community or anything they used. The boys exchanged glances without speaking. Joseph was the closest. He had not moved when Isaac stopped. He was looking at the exposed surface with the particular stillness of a child encountering something that had asked, somehow, for his attention. He took one step forward, then another. He crouched, slowly, until he was nearly at the level of the exposed material. The breeze moved through the field. The other boys shifted their weight without realizing they were doing it. Abraham, watching, felt a coldness arrive in his chest that he could not have explained. Joseph extended his hand. He did not touch it. His fingers paused above the surface, no more than a hand's width away, the small, uncertain hover of a boy who had been raised to ask before he reached. The light on the surface shifted. It was small enough that Abraham almost dismissed it. A flicker, a faint thread of pale color, blue or green or something that resembled both without being either, moved through the material and was gone before he could be certain it had been there at all. The afternoon sun on the field, a trick of his own old eyes. Joseph's fingers were still in the air above the surface. He had not noticed his own breathing slow. He lowered his hand another fraction. "Don't." Abraham's voice cut the moment clean. Joseph's hand stopped. He did not jerk back. He simply paused, the way an obedient child pauses when an adult he trusts has spoken. But his eyes did not leave the exposed surface, and for a second longer than Abraham would have expected, his hand stayed where it was, suspended above whatever it had almost done. Then he stood and stepped back. Abraham moved forward, placed himself between his sons and the object, and crouched to examine it more carefully. The light on the surface was steady. Whatever he had seen, or thought he had seen, was no longer present, if it had ever been present at all. The shape extended beyond what they had uncovered, wider and deeper than the exposed portion suggested, continuing into the ground in directions the shovels had not reached. Not a rock, not a tool, not any tool he recognized, or could imagine a use for. Something that did not belong to any category available to him. He straightened slowly. "Isaac, yes, Father, go to the council." A brief hesitation. "Now?" "Now." Isaac nodded once and turned, breaking into a run toward the distant cluster of homes without another word. The others stayed where they were, arranged around the exposed surface in a loose, uncertain circle. The work rhythm of the morning had completely dissolved. The wind shifted, carrying salt from the sea across the field. David spoke first, voice kept low as though volume might matter. "What is it?" Abraham did not answer immediately, because he did not know, and because not knowing, in a community built on the principle that they controlled what entered their lives, was the thing that made it dangerous before anything else about it could be assessed. "Something that does not belong to us," he said finally. The boys went quiet. Abraham looked back down at the exposed surface, calculating without the tools to do so properly. They had uncovered a fraction of it. But even that fraction was enough to understand that whatever lay beneath this field had been placed here deliberately, by something capable of deliberate placement, long before anyone in this community had ever broken this ground. He glanced once at Joseph. The boy was standing where Abraham had left him, hands at his sides. His expression was the same as it had always been, calm, attentive, the face of a child who would do what he was told and ask his questions later. But his eyes had not yet left the object. In the distance, Isaac's figure shrank as he ran toward the settlement, toward the council, toward authority and guidance, and the weight of a decision that Abraham already understood would not be simple. Behind him, in the field, something ancient held its position in the earth. Unmoving, silent, but no longer hidden. And, though Abraham would not allow himself the thought, somehow, in the slow shifting of light he had almost certainly imagined, no longer entirely asleep. 26. Oversight. Houston did not pretend to be comfortable. The city had been rebuilt to endure rather than to feel livable. Raised seawalls, reinforced districts, layers of infrastructure designed to hold back a world that had changed faster than anyone had planned for. The air still carried the weight of the Gulf, thick and humid, pressing down like a constant reminder that nature had not yielded so much as negotiated terms it could live with. Inside the Human Coalition Naval Command Complex, built over and around what had once been Johnson's Space Center, the temperature dropped, the air dried, and the noise of the outside world faded behind sealed walls and controlled systems. Whatever the Gulf was doing out there was irrelevant in here. In one of the most secure rooms in the facility, the people responsible for humanity's position among the stars had gathered again. Admiral Stephen Archuleta stood at the head of the table. To his right, Rear Admiral Miranda Blackwell sat with the composed stillness of someone whose authority did not require posture to communicate itself. Around them, senior leadership filled the remaining seats. Fleet admirals, marine generals, strategic operations commanders. Vice Admiral Reyes occupied the same position he had during the Trappist debrief. 3 seats down on the left, hands folded in front of him with the steady attention of a man who had not forgotten the last time the room had convened on Hansen's account. A courier drone had arrived, with it answers. "Play it," Archuleta said. Hansen's logs appeared first. Calm, direct, economical with words in the way his command voice always was. Anchor station, the whisper network contact, the acquisition of Tarek Vol's data, and the confirmation of Three Hills' involvement, none of it editorialized. Then, the Miri Hamura's medical logs followed. Clinical and precise, but threaded with something that did not belong to clinical language. The condition of the male on arrival, the biological significance of what had been done to him, the fragility of his remaining connection to the hive mind. All documented with the care of someone who found the facts upsetting and was recording them anyway. Then the plan: return the male voluntarily, exchange for a Miri envoy, build something from the ground up rather than extract advantage from a situation that had already produced enough harm. Silence settled over the room as the logs concluded. It did not last. Reyes spoke first. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He has decided to return a hostage of strategic value, without consultation, to a species we have functionally never spoken to. He sent a courier drone announcing the decision, Blackwell said. Announcing. Not requesting. Reyes did not look at her. He looked at Archuleta. He has made first diplomatic contact with the Miri unilaterally. He has committed the coalition to an exchange whose terms he negotiated alone. He has selected the location. By the time this drone reached us, the rendezvous was already in motion. He is operating within his command authority, Blackwell said. He is operating at the edge of it. That is the line he was put there to operate at. Archuleta said it without raising his voice. The room had heard him use the same phrasing here before, and the repetition was the point. A Marine general, Stratton, leaned slightly forward. And if the Miri envoy is not what he expects, then we respond to what we are looking at, not to what we were imagining, Archuleta said. He's surrendering leverage. Another voice further down the table. We have a hostage of irreplaceable significance to a closed species, and we are giving him back without conditions. Blackwell turned to face him directly. We are not holding a sentient being hostage. I am stating the tactical reality. You are suggesting we behave like the people we are trying to stop. The silence that followed was sharper than the first. Archuleta let it sit briefly before stepping in. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The Miri male is critical to his species' genetic continuity. Without him, they are facing extinction pressure. That is not a leverage position. It is a line we do not cross. He looked around the table. We could keep him. We could trade him for what we want from his people. We would also be the first species in 3 centuries of established interspecies contact to do that to a Miri male, and we would be doing it after recovering him from the people who took him. The optics are not the issue. The substance is the issue. A different fleet officer spoke. If the envoy exchange is genuine, we gain direct diplomatic access to a species that has been effectively closed to outside contact, that has long-term value that dwarfs any short-term tactical advantage. Yes, Stratton said, and the strategic position will hold longer if we earn it than if we extract it. The argument did not disappear, but it changed shape, which was its own kind of progress. Reyes did not argue further. He filed. Hansen understood all of this when he made the call, Archuleta said. That is why he made it. Reyes inclined his head. Not concession, not agreement. Just acknowledgement that the room had moved past where he had tried to hold it. Then the door opened. No announcement. No clearance request preceding it. Just entry, with the directness of someone who had never needed to ask permission to be in a room and did not intend to start. Every head turned. Children. Small frame, immaculate posture, the kind of stillness that suggested the capacity for very fast movement rather than the absence of it. The face was unmistakable to anyone who had studied the Concord Warden files. Volkson. No one moved to stop him. No one could, strictly speaking. Concord Wardens did not operate under the same rules as the people in this room. They operated in a different category entirely, one this room's authority did not fully reach. Volkson stepped forward and stopped just short of the table. I apologize for the interruption. His tone made clear it was a courtesy rather than an apology. Archuleta studied him for a moment. You have the floor. I am aware of the situation and of Captain Hansen's actions to date. I will be traveling to Wolf 359 to assist in ensuring a successful outcome. A brief pause. Weighted. Deliberate. I will also be evaluating him. For candidacy. The question that produced did not need to be spoken aloud. It was present in the quality of the silence, and in the way several people around the table exchanged glances without quite meeting each other's eyes. A human, Concord Warden candidacy. You believe he is qualified? Archuleta asked. I believe he demonstrates the necessary qualities. He prioritizes stability over tactical advantage. He exercises restraint when force is available and tempting. He adapts to conditions faster than his experience level would predict. Another pause. He also acts without waiting for permission. A few more glances exchanged. Blackwell came as close to smiling as she usually allowed herself in this room. And you will make that determination personally? Yes. Simple. Finished. Archuleta turned toward the communications station. Prepare a Priority 1 courier drone, direct to Singapore. Destination Wolf 359. Command staff access only. No relay. He waited for the acknowledgement before continuing. Inform Captain Hansen that a Concord Warden will rendezvous with him at Wolf 359. Advise him to exercise full diplomatic latitude with the Miri exchange. A brief pause. And make it clear that the scope of this situation has expanded significantly. It will be done, Admiral. The room settled into a different quality of silence than the one that had preceded the logs. Heavier, more considered. What had begun as a recovery operation, contained, definable, with a clear objective and a clear endpoint, had become something that did not fit those categories anymore. Wardens were involved. The Miri were sending an envoy. The alien database was still in Three Heels' possession and still unread. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a human captain was moving toward Wolf 359 without yet knowing how much the weight of what he had set in motion had grown. Volkson stood quietly at the edge of the table, already thinking past the room and past the conversation, and past everything currently being managed in it. Wolf 359. Where the exchange would happen, where trust would be tested in real time, and where one captain would discover exactly how far his decisions had already carried, and how much farther they were going to have to go. 27 stand by. The football spun lazily in my hands, not a tight spiral, just enough rotation to keep my fingers occupied while my mind worked through questions that didn't have clean answers yet. Lately, that category covered most of the available territory. The Myri exchange, the artifact still somewhere in Thrihill's possession. None of it resolved into something I could file away. It just turned, like the ball, finding no resting point. Himura stood near the desk with her tablet, posture carrying the quality she had when holding medicine and everything else in the same hand at once, relaxed on the surface, focused underneath. "He's resting," she said. "The hammock isn't ideal, but it's better for him than the med bay." A deck below us, Kemov and 3 of his Marines had spent the better part of 2 days rigging accommodations the Myri's anatomy could actually use. Straps, fabric, a support frame welded out of cargo restraint hardware, structural foam pads from the medical inventory, and one of the spare bulkhead panels nobody was going to miss. The frame cradled his abdomen without putting pressure on it. The hammock itself was more like a sling, wide, soft, tensioned at angles Himura had specified to within a degree. It looked exactly like what it was. Something built from good intentions and available materials by people whose normal day involved breaching doors and moving in stacks. I'd come down once during construction, late, and found Kemov on his back under the frame with a torch. 2 of the Marines were measuring fabric tension with the kind of attention they normally reserve for ammunition counts. One was sewing a softer interior layer onto the abdominal cradle, because Himura had mentioned in passing that Myri skin was sensitive to abrasion. None of them said much when I arrived. Kemov did not look up. He said, "Doctor specified 70-degree angle on lateral support. We are achieving 68. We will achieve 70. I left them to it." He asked to be moved away from the crew quarters, Himura added now. Less stimulation, less noise. Can't blame him. He'd been ripped out of a hive mind, held in isolation, weaponized as a biological key, extracted under fire, and then placed aboard a human warship running under stealth with 20 crew and a children he'd never met. The cargo bay probably felt like a retreat by comparison. Probably felt like the first thing that had gone right. Himura's expression softened slightly, not losing its professional quality, just allowing something more personal to occupy the same space. Gibby has promised him access to his personal movie library. I looked up. That's one approach to first contact. It isn't a perfect substitute for sharing food, she said carefully. The way she chose words sometimes, precise, measured, honest without being blunt, was something I'd noticed early and kept noticing. No. But knowing Gibby, he'll treat it as a challenge rather than a limitation, and somehow produce the equivalent. I tossed the football lightly. Did he include Star Trek IV? She blinked. I'm not familiar with it. I looked at her for a moment. Doctor, that is required viewing, non-negotiable. On what grounds? Because apparently I'm being compared to Captain Kirk, which makes it professionally relevant. That earned a faint reaction. The specific quality of amusement she allowed herself when she decided something was worth it. Alien probe arrives at Earth looking for humpback whales. Problem is, we've driven them to extinction, so the probe starts wrecking the planet trying to communicate with something that no longer exists. Her brow furrowed. That's unfortunate. So Kirk and his crew steal a Klingon ship, slingshot around the sun, go back to the 1980s to collect 2 humpback whales and bring them forward to answer the probe. A pause. That sounds extraordinarily improbable. Completely. Also, important historical correction. They didn't steal the Klingon ship in 4. They stole it in 3, after the Enterprise blew up when Kirk killed the Klingon commander in hand-to-hand combat on the Genesis planet. The crew just kept it. By the time 4 starts, they've already had it for an entire film. They're flying it home to face court-martial when the probe shows up. So technically, the entire San Francisco humpback whale operation is conducted from a stolen Klingon bird of prey they had been operating for several months. I tossed the ball. I have made this clarification to a number of people over the years. None of them have appreciated it. Himura considered this. Why does the distinction matter? Because if you're going to compare me to Kirk, I want the record to reflect that he was already operating outside the chain of command, in stolen alien hardware, with a pending court-martial, before the time travel improvisation began. Less favorably, considerably less favorably. Also, Spock wanders around San Francisco looking like a monk trying to hide his ears. None of them know how to blend in with the 20th century, and everything that can go wrong does. I set the ball turning in my palms again. Top-tier entertainment. She gave me the careful attention she gave to things she hadn't encountered before, and was deciding how to categorize. And this clarifies the Kirk comparison. How? It clarifies that being compared to Kirk isn't entirely a compliment. He gets there. The planet doesn't get destroyed. But the path involves a lot of improvisation that probably shouldn't have worked. That got a small, genuine smile. I stored it away with the others. The room settled into quiet that didn't need filling. I looked toward the forward bulkhead as though I could see through it, down through the deck, through engineering, to the cargo bay, where a species that communicated across interstellar distances through means we still didn't fully understand was resting in a hammock. 4 men had spent 48 hours getting right. I hope he doesn't think we're pressuring him, I said. The words came out quieter than I'd intended. Himura did not respond immediately. She had the quality of someone who did not fill silences reflexively. His stress indicators are elevated, she said finally. But the trajectory is stable. He's not deteriorating. That's not quite what I meant. I know. I exhaled and set the ball still for a moment. We pulled him out of a bad situation and immediately dropped him into our situation. We made decisions about his trajectory without asking what he wanted, because we didn't have time, and because asking wasn't operationally viable, and because we told ourselves those were good enough reasons. I looked at the ball. I'm not sure they were. She stepped closer, and without any particular announcement she placed her hand over mine, over the football, warm and steady, the kind of contact that doesn't need explanation because it's communicating something language would only reduce. He trusts you, she said quietly. I looked at her, not as the physician, not as the officer, just as Nara Himura, who had been the clearest moral compass in every situation this operation had produced, and who had never once confused clarity with simplicity. Hope that's enough, I said. For now, she replied. Her hand stayed a moment longer than the gesture required. Neither of us moved to change that. Then the door chimed. I didn't look away immediately. Come in. Hernandez stepped through and stopped just inside. No sitting, no leaning, hands loosely clasped behind her back in the posture she used when the conversation was going to be professional, regardless of whatever else was in the room. She took in the scene with a quick cataloging glance and filed what she'd noticed without comment. That was one of the things I'd come to rely on about her. We need to talk about the exchange. I gestured for her to continue and kept my voice neutral. This conversation had been coming since we sent the courier drone to Houston, and I'd been thinking about how to handle it since then. She stepped forward slightly, the way she did when she was making a case rather than just delivering information. Once the mail is returned, we have nothing that obligates the Mairi to cooperate with us on anything. The leverage disappears the moment the exchange completes. Himura did not hesitate. He's not leverage. He's a living being essential to his species' genetic continuity who has experienced significant trauma. Framing him as leverage is the kind of thinking that gets species remembered badly by the ones they treated that way. Hernandez met her gaze. I'm speaking from a tactical position, and I'm speaking from a medical and ethical one, both of which have standing at this table. Same argument, same two people, same genuine disagreement between two frameworks that were both internally coherent. I'd been watching this particular tension since the Situation Room debrief when we first learned who the Miri male was and what his return would mean. I respected both of them for holding their positions without backing away from each other. I rotated the football once. Keep going, I said to Hernandez. She took a breath that reset her posture slightly, not backing down. Refocusing. The envoy they're sending us is considerably less biologically critical to the Miri than the male. That's not a judgment about her value as a person. It's a biological fact, which means from their perspective, sending her as an exchange doesn't represent the same kind of vulnerability that keeping the male did for us. Meaning they can accept the risk of sending her in ways they couldn't accept the risk of him. Meaning if something goes wrong with the exchange, if there's a misunderstanding, if 3 interferes, if the diplomatic situation deteriorates, they've spent something replaceable. That hung in the air with the specific weight of things that are accurate and uncomfortable at the same time. Himura's arms crossed lightly. They're sending her to build trust, to observe us, to make a judgment about whether we're the kind of species worth a genuine relationship. Both can be true at once, Hernandez said. Building trust and managing risk aren't mutually exclusive. No, Himura agreed. They're not. I looked between them. Two people I trusted, seeing the same situation from angles that didn't overlap completely and probably shouldn't. The tension between their positions wasn't a problem to be resolved. It was the shape of the actual decision. They need him back, I said, not because we're offering something, but because he's irreplaceable to them in ways that don't have equivalents. Hive stability, genetic continuity, whatever their internal architecture requires. He's central to it in ways we probably don't fully understand yet. I looked at Hernandez. And we need a relationship with the Miri. Not just because of what they might be able to contribute to the database problem, because they're a spacefaring species we've just had our first real contact with, and whether that contact becomes something sustainable depends entirely on what we do in the next few hours. She held my gaze with the steady attention of someone weighing the decision against her own judgment, not just accepting it because I'd spoken. So we're doing this, I said. A moment. Then a single nod, not enthusiastic, not reluctant. The kind of acceptance that comes from someone who disagrees on the margins but recognizes where the real decision lies. From Hernandez, that quality of acceptance was its own kind of trust. Bridge to Captain, Bishop. I tapped the wall panel. Go ahead. We've arrived in the Wolf 359 system. Also, a courier drone just came in from Houston. Priority flag. What's the message? A brief pause. No hesitation, just Bishop being precise. Stand by. A Concord warden is en route to rendezvous with us at Wolf 359. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Of course they were. Copy. Anything else in the package? That's the headline. The rest is operational support material. Nothing that changes the immediate situation. Maintain position. Stay ready for the exchange. Aye, Captain. The line closed. I looked at Hernandez, then at Himura. The room felt different than it had a minute ago. Same people, same ship, same mission, but with one more variable that changed the weight of everything else. Not because a Concord warden being present was a threat, because everything we did in the next several hours was going to be observed and evaluated by someone whose assessment of me in Singapore had implications well past this operation. New audience, same stakes, different visibility. I set the football down on the desk and stood. General quarters, all crew to stations. We're not keeping anyone waiting. Hernandez was already moving before I finished. That was her way. No gap between decision and execution once the decision was made. I stayed for a moment longer in the ready room, looking at the football sitting still on the desk. Out here, between species still working out whether they trusted each other, with a merry mail in the cargo bay, and the exchange that would determine whether any of this produced something lasting. There was no room for anything that wasn't exactly right. No margin. No second chances on the first impression. We were at the center of something that was going to matter for a long time, and the only question was whether we were going to be worth the position we'd been given. I headed for the bridge. 28, the exception. The village clung to the cliffs as if it had always belonged there. Stone walls, narrow paths, the steady rhythm of work and routine moving through it like a current that had never been interrupted. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward into the late afternoon air and carried out toward the sea. Life on Eden moved slowly, deliberately, and entirely by choice. Isaac Thompson ran straight through all of it. Past the well, past the mill house, past a pair of oxen being led back from the lower terraces by a farmhand, who called after him and received nothing in return. He did not slow, did not greet anyone, did not stop to explain himself. His father had said now, and when Abraham Thompson said now, explanation was not part of the transaction. The meeting house stood at the center of the village, larger than the homes surrounding it, built of heavier stone, its doors open to the coastal breeze. Isaac reached it, his breath short but controlled, and stepped inside. Two men sat near the far end of the room, deep in a conversation that had the comfortable texture of something that had been going on for a while. Aaron Ward, the village leader, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, with the kind of voice that stayed steady even when the topic did not, was leaning back in his chair with an expression of mild grievance. Beside him, Pastor Daniel Mercer sat with the composure of someone who had heard every argument at least twice and had stopped being surprised by any of them. "I'm telling you," Ward was saying, 5 wives sounds like a blessing until they all decide you're wrong at the same time." "That is not a flaw in the arrangement," Mercer replied. "That is accountability. It's an ambush. It is community. They compare notes, as they should." "They coordinate that," Mercer said, allowing the faintest widening of his expression is called wisdom. Ward opened his mouth. "Sir?" Isaac's voice cut the room clean. Both men turned immediately. Ward's easy humor gone, replaced with the attentiveness that village leadership required to stay useful. "Isaac, you need to come now. The plow hit something in the field. It's not stone. That was sufficient." Ward stood. Mercer followed a heartbeat behind him. "Show us." They moved quickly back through the village as the sun began its descent, casting longer shadows across the stone paths. Nobody speculated on the walk. On Eden, when something failed to fit the world as they understood it, the practice was to look before guessing. Guessing without evidence produced the wrong kind of decisions. The field came into view over the rise. Abraham stood where Isaac had left him, the plow idle beside him. The ox calm but watchful in the way animals were calm when they had registered something unusual and moved past the initial alarm. The other boys, Jacob, Joseph, David, Solomon, and the rest, stood nearby with their tools set aside, attention fixed on a single point in the ground. Ward slowed as they approached. Abraham turned. "You came quickly. Isaac said it wasn't stone." Ward moved past him toward the exposed area. "It isn't." Ward and Mercer stepped forward together. The cleared ground revealed a portion of a surface that did not belong to any category either man had an immediate word for. Smooth, uniform, with a quality that the surrounding soil made more conspicuous rather than less. No grain, no fracture lines, no evidence of the geological processes that produced everything else in this field. Ward crouched slowly and studied it without touching. His hand moved forward once, hovered above the surface, then withdrew. Mercer stood just behind him. "This is not something we use, no. And not something we made, no." The coastal wind moved across the field, rustling the turned soil at the edges of the excavation. The boys watched without speaking. Abraham crossed his arms. "What do we do?" Ward stood slowly. He did not answer immediately because the answer was not simple and he knew it. Eden had rules, clear ones, foundational ones. Technology was limited by consensus. Contact with the outside was controlled. Interference in either direction was actively avoided. That was how they stayed who they were. That was the entire point of the place. Mercer spoke first. "This falls outside normal practice." "Yes." A pause held between them. Two men working through the same calculation from different directions and arriving at the same destination. "This requires an exception," Ward said. The word carried weight in the way that words carry weight in communities built on consistent principles. The boys standing around the excavation did not fully understand its significance, but they understood that it mattered, which was enough for now. Abraham nodded once. "Then we make it." Ward looked back at the object. Something buried beneath their land, beneath the land of their fathers, beneath the settlement itself. Something that had been there before any of them. Something placed rather than formed. "We contact New Providence." Mercer exhaled slowly. "That will draw attention. It already has. That settled it." They turned back toward the village. Inside the meeting house, the old communication system sat against the far wall, not forbidden but rarely used, which on Eden amounted to nearly the same thing. Ward moved to it, paused for just a moment, then activated it. The line crackled. "New Providence Central, Aaron Ward, Outpost 17, go ahead." Ward glanced once at Mercer, then back at the console. "We have discovered an object buried beneath agricultural land. It does not match any known material or tool in use here, or in any reference we have access to." Silence on the line. Then, "Understood. Stand by." Mercer folded his hands. Outside, the wind moved through the settlement in the unhurried way it always did, indifferent to what was happening inside. The voice returned. "We will dispatch a team. This will be elevated to Capitol Review." Ward nodded, even though the gesture could not be seen. "There's more. We may need to notify Earth." The tone on the line changed immediately and perceptibly. "Explain." Ward looked toward the door, toward the field beyond the village edge, toward the ground that had been turned that morning in the ordinary expectation of ordinary work. "We don't know what this is." A longer silence followed. Then, "Understood. We will advise." The line went quiet. Ward let out a slow breath. Mercer spoke softly beside him. "We've crossed a line." Ward considered that for a moment. "No." He looked back toward the horizon, toward the cliffs and the sea beyond them, and the field somewhere in between. "We found one, and somewhere beneath the soil of Eden. Something that had never been intended for them had just become impossible to ignore." 29 Terms of Business. Anchor Station never slept. It did not need to. Built into the hollowed remains of an ancient asteroid, it ran on a constant low hum of commerce, secrecy, and survival. Neon bled color into metal corridors. Languages overlapped and tangled. Deals were made in whispers and enforced in silence. And everyone who spent more than a week there learned exactly where the real business happened. Sagittarius Eye. Three-Heel did not slow as he entered. The doors parted, and the ambient noise of the station folded inward into something more controlled. Warm lighting, polished surfaces, a bar engineered to suggest a world far removed from vacuum and criminal enterprise. Behind him, a contingent of brown dwarfs moved in formation. Human, Lenian, Kalar, a multi-species arrangement of muscle and intent that he did not need, and everyone in the room knew he did not need. That was not the point. It was a statement, and the room received it correctly. Conversations dipped as they passed through, then resumed with greater care. He moved straight through the main floor without acknowledging anything. Security fell in beside him, not to stop him, but to guide him, because some doors on Anchor Station did not open unless someone on the other side decided they should. This one did. The seal disengaged with a soft hiss, and sound dropped to nothing as he stepped through. The room beyond was insulated, shielded, built for conversations that had no business leaving. The kind of space that cost significantly more than the furniture inside it. Elias Vance stood near the far side of the table. Immaculate and composed, every detail of his presentation calibrated to project the southern gentleman he had always chosen to be. Sarek Val sat opposite him. Older than most of his kind in the visible way that extended life eventually became impossible to conceal fully. His children frame carried the accumulated weight of years pushed past their natural terminus, but his eyes were sharp and calculating and offered nothing for free. The door sealed behind Three-Heel. Silence settled, and with it something else. Expectation with an edge to it. Elias Vance did not smile. That was the first indication that this was not a social call. Under normal circumstances, he would have already moved toward hospitality. A drink offered. Food suggested. Warmth deployed as the opening currency of any serious conversation. This time, nothing. Which meant the terms were already set, and pleasantries were not part of them. Sarek Val did not wait. You cost me. No greeting, no preamble, just the fact of it, stated with the flatness of someone who had already done the accounting. Three-Heel said nothing. The silence was the answer he intended. Sarek had earned the right to make the statement. He had not earned an apology, and an apology delivered without that earning would have been heard correctly as the absence of one. Sarek leaned forward slightly. My contacts in the Whisper network identified the Miri transport, a rare opportunity and a valuable one. I committed resources, personnel, ships. At significant cost to force boarding, the resistance was considerable. A pause. We eliminated it. All of it. All the females. To reach the male? The words arrived without emphasis and without softening, which made them land harder than anger would have. Everyone in the room understood that what had been described was not merely violence. It was a consequence, the kind that could not be walked back. Sarek leaned back slightly. And then you approached me with an idea. His eyes were fixed on Three-Heel fully. You wanted access to the mail, to his hive mind connection, to use it to break the database. It was a viable path, Three-Heel said. He did not soften it, did not hedge. The sentence was the assessment he had made at the time, delivered in the present without revision, because revising it under pressure would have communicated something he was not prepared to communicate. It was a path, Sarek replied, that cost me everything I invested to secure it. The connection was disrupted. The mail destabilized. A pause that had more weight than the words surrounding it. And then Hansen arrived. The name sat differently in a room like this than it did anywhere else. "Your failure," Sarek said, allowed him to interfere. Three-Heel held the line steady before responding. The phrasing was deliberate, your failure rather than the situation, and Sarek had chosen it knowing how it would land. Three-Heel could correct the framing. He could also accept it and conserve the energy required to argue a point that did not change the operational picture. He chose the second. He acted outside expected parameters. It was an observation, not a defense. The distinction was for Sarek to register. Sarek gave a short, humorless exhale. Of course he did. He's human. Elias Vance moved for the first time, stepping closer to the table and folding his hands lightly in front of him with the ease of someone who had been waiting for his moment in the conversation. "Speaking of Captain Hansen," he said, voice measured and smooth, "things have evolved since your last contact with him." He let that settle before continuing. "The Navy intends to return the mail voluntarily, in exchange for a female Miri envoy, diplomatic observer, embedded with the crew. That produced a reaction from Three-Heel. Subtle, but present. They are building an alliance. They are building leverage," Vance corrected gently, "and they will not be doing it alone." A brief pause. "A Concord warden is involved in the exchange." He let that land, then added, "There is also discussion that Hansen himself may be evaluated for candidacy." Silence held the room for a moment. Even Sarek Val stilled in a way that indicated he was recalculating something. Three-Heel produced a low, humorless exhale. "He will not survive the evaluation process." He delivered the line as fact, not prediction. Hansen would either be terminated by the operational environment Three-Heel intended to produce around him, or terminated by the Concord's own assessment once it ran long enough. Either path led to the same outcome. "Perhaps," Vance said. "Perhaps not." "The rendezvous is set at Wolf 359, he continued. "The timeline is tight." Three-Heel straightened slightly. "I can intercept. If I move now." "Don't." Sarek Val's voice cut across him, cold and final, with no anger in it, which made it considerably more effective than anger would have been. Three-Heel looked at him. "I am not interested in watching you fail again." The words arrived clean and without decoration. Not a reprimand delivered in heat. A judgment delivered in the kind of chill that came from someone who had already made the assessment and was communicating the result. Three-Heel held the line again. He did not respond because there was nothing useful to say, and because attempting to argue the framing would have been the response Sarek expected. Anger was a leak. He did not leak. Sarek leaned forward. "The Whisper Network has provided new information." He waited a beat, ensuring the room's full attention before continuing. "There may be another key to the database." Even Vance sharpened at that. "Where?" Three-Heel said. Sarek held his gaze. "Eden." The name hung in the room, without context, for a fraction of a second. Then Elias Vance laughed. A hard, genuine laugh that cut through the tension, with the ease of something that had been waiting to escape. "Eden?" he said. "You're serious?" He shook his head, the smile holding. "That's where all the religious isolationists went. Luddites. Half of them capped their technology at the early 21st century. The other half would be comfortable in the 19th. He gestured loosely. Beasts of burden, manual labor. The complete rejection of anything that might make life easier. Three-Heel did not laugh. He did not move. The stillness was deliberate, and Vance registered it within a second. The laugh receding without quite finishing, the smile holding for a heartbeat past where it had been useful. The room's center of gravity, which had briefly drifted toward Vance's amusement, returned to where it had started. They would not recognize what they had, Three-Heel said. Exactly, Vance replied. The amusement had dropped entirely now, replaced by something more considered. Which means, Sarek said, cutting back in, no one else has taken it yet. The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Not the silence of tension or confrontation, but the silence of people recognizing an open window and calculating how long it would stay that way. Three-Heel felt its shape immediately. A new path, a new angle, one nobody else had yet moved to close. Wolf 359 could wait. Hansen could have his exchange. Hansen could have his envoy, his Concord evaluation, the brief illusion of momentum. By the time he understood what had been moving while he was moving, the geometry would have changed. This was the play. Not catching Hansen at the rendezvous. Reaching Eden before the Coalition knew Eden mattered. Sarek leaned back. This is where you make it right. Not a suggestion offered for consideration. A directive with the weight of everything owed behind it. Three-Heel held his gaze for a moment. He nodded once. Outside the sealed room, Anchor Station continued its endless motion. Deals made, power exchanged, information sold to whoever arrived with the right currency at the right moment. And somewhere across the void, on a world that had deliberately turned its back on progress, something ancient had just been pulled out of the ground by people who had no framework for what they were looking at. Everyone who mattered was about to start moving toward it. 30. Pattern. Stealth has a sound, not something you hear, something you feel. The absence of everything else. No idle chatter, no unnecessary movement, systems running tight and quiet. Singapore, holding position like it, had decided to stop existing for a while. Which, right now, was exactly the point. I sat in the captain's chair just behind the helm. Best seat on the ship and the worst one simultaneously, depending on what was happening. Hernandez held the forward command station to my left, posture locked in with the consistency of someone who had not moved in an hour, and probably had not. Himura sat to my right with her tablet, working through Miri data again. Anything change? She did not look up immediately. No significant degradation. Vitals are stable, and the reconnection attempts are still taxing but measurably less so than before. That's progress, yes. A deck below us, Gibby was running his own version of first contact diplomacy, which currently involved attempting to explain human comedy to a Miri through the medium of see no evil, hear no evil. Bold choice, I muttered. Himura glanced over. The film with the blind man and the deaf man? Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor. She considered this for a moment. Gibby believes this will be effective. Gibby believes a lot of things. A faint hint of a smile. She turned back to her tablet. The rest of the crew held their stations in the focused stillness of people waiting for something they could not accelerate. The Miri envoy, the Concord warden, whatever came next. Bishop shifted slightly at helm. Captain, courier drone incoming from Houston. Priority flag. Of course there is. She kept working without responding, which was its own kind of efficiency. A moment later, the forward display updated, and I leaned forward as the message resolved. Another artifact. Hernandez turned her head just enough to register it. Location? Eden. That pulled the bridge's attention in a way that very few words could. Himura straightened. Someone at a secondary station stopped what they were doing. The independent settlement? Himura said. That Eden? Hernandez frowned slightly. Walk me through the jurisdictional picture. I have not had cause to look at it in detail. Independent governance. Self-electing council. No coalition representation in their internal politics. Full sovereignty over their own affairs. I leaned back, but not isolated from coalition systems. They retain protectorate status. Meaning? They opted out of full membership. But they did not opt out of the relationship. They use coalition courier infrastructure when they need to communicate off-world. They get access to coalition emergency response if they request it. And in exchange, the coalition retains the right to act on their behalf, or in their territory, when something arises that affects regional stability. A beat, an artifact under their farmland, is the kind of thing that arises. Hernandez absorbed it. So we have standing. We have standing. We are not violating sovereignty by going there. We do not need an invitation we are unlikely to receive in time, and we do not need their permission for a presence they would not have granted on principle. Himura's expression was careful, but we are still going onto a world whose people have explicitly chosen not to involve themselves in the wider human political environment. Yes, that requires care. It requires more care than most things this operation has required, yes. I looked back at the display and let the original problem sit alongside the political one. You ever get the feeling this isn't random? Hernandez did not look at me. Define this. Artifacts, where they keep showing up. Nobody filled the silence, so I kept going. We find one on Earth's moon. That's the event that kicks everything into motion. The tech jump, the expansion, all of it. Then another turns up in the Trappist system, coalition colony world. I paused, and now Eden, independent of the coalition, but human and under coalition protectorate. 3 artifacts, Hernandez said, all of them in proximity to us, or to places we went, or to places people from Earth chose to settle. Himura spoke quietly. The pattern suggests intentional placement. That's what I keep coming back to. And then there's the Lenian, a species that originated on Earth, or close enough that the distinction barely matters, relocated by someone we have never been able to identify. By the same unknown party, presumably. Maybe. I rested my forearms on my knees and looked at the display. We don't know who moved them. We don't know who placed the artifacts. We don't know why any of it keeps orienting itself around humanity the way it does. I shook my head slightly. But it does. Every time. Hernandez said carefully, "You're suggesting deliberate targeting. I'm suggesting that either we're spectacularly lucky, which, given recent events, seems unlikely, or somebody has a particular interest in humans, specifically a beat, and has had that interest for a very long time." That landed in the room without anyone laughing, which told me the crew had been sitting with similar thoughts, and had not said them out loud yet either. Himura studied me with the attention she brought to things she was genuinely uncertain about. That is an uncomfortable conclusion. Yeah, I don't love it either. I stood up. The bridge felt different than it had 10 minutes ago. Tighter, more consequential, like the walls had moved in a few centimeters without anyone touching them. The galaxy had either gotten smaller, or we had gotten more significant, and I was not sure which of those options was more unsettling. I looked at the display again. Eden. Independent, religiously grounded, deliberately low-tech, a community that had made a principled decision to opt out of most of what the rest of humanity had built. Still under coalition protectorate, technically. Still human, fundamentally. And now an artifact, buried under their agricultural land, uncovered by a plow. Of course it was. Here's where we are. The bridge oriented toward me without anyone making a show of it. We finished the exchange at Wolf 359. We handle the warden evaluation, whatever that looks like in practice. We see the merry mail home and receive the envoy. I straightened. And then we go to Eden, no debate. No questions about whether that was the right call. Maybe because everyone in the room had already worked through the same logic and arrived at the same place. Whatever was happening out here, we were not observing it from a distance anymore. We were inside it, moving through it, and the pattern kept pointing in the same direction. I settled back into the chair. Stealth. Silence. Waiting, but not for much longer. Somewhere in the dark, two different parties were already moving toward us. And somewhere else entirely, on a world that had specifically chosen to be left alone, something very old had just made that choice a great deal more complicated. We were going to it. You have been listening to part 2 of the Trappist Incident, R.M. Stratton's first book in his military science fiction series, Concord Horizon. If you have enjoyed the audiobook, the link for the ebook is available at Amazon, at the link in the description.